Chapter 319. The figure of the red dragon roared past. When a round of dragon's breath was over, its huge body began to dive down. The northern witches began to aim spells at the red dragon in the sky, but there were few spells that could cause fatal damage to it. Adult red dragons had strong resistance to spells. Basically, spells below level 3 had little effect on them. Sometimes, even the protection of the dragon scales could not be broken. Adult red dragons had 10 points of spell reduction. Its dragon body was immune to any spell attack with less than 10 points of damage. At the same time, it was also immune to any fire damage. Fireball. Fireballs the size of washbasins fell from the sky. However, they did not come from other spellcasters, but directly from the mouth of the red dragon. As the most powerful dragon in the chromatic dragon, the adult red dragon had a spellcaster level of 7 to 9, which meant that it was roughly equivalent to a level 8 dragon disciple. The speed at which dragons learned spells was relatively slow. In fact, very few dragons were very eager to learn, so their spells were all learned on their own. A studious dragon was quite terrible. This kind of dragon was also 1 in 100 among the dragons because it meant that they had to deal with human-like creatures. Rumble. There was a violent explosion. The first wave of dragon breath had yet to break the defensive formation of the northern witches, but the second wave of fireball spells had forcefully cleared out the monsters summoned by the northern witches. Dragon spells. Although there were not as many types as wizards, the number of times it was used was not small at all. The red dragon did not use those low-grade control spells, because it was basically impossible to threaten the high-grade northern witches. All the spells it used were area of effect spells, the purpose of which was to clean up the summoned creatures. It was very cunning and knew how to use tactics. It even knew how to choose weak enemies to attack. So when it found a chance to attack the northern witches' formation after cleaning up the summoned monsters, the red dragon immediately flapped its huge dragon wings and swooped down. Dragon Wing Strike. No spell was better than the power of the dragon itself. The adult red dragon's strength was the highest among all the dragons. It could reach 33 points of strength without any extra bloodline talent. This power was enough to flatten most of the creatures in the material plane. Therefore, as long as a person was hit by the dragon's wings, most of them would die on the spot, have their bodies broken, or be knocked unconscious. The northern witches were no different. That was why the northern witches had all activated the teleportation spells they had prepared when they sensed the crimson dragon diving down from the sky, as well as the dragon's wing strike that followed closely behind. Bang. Then a distorted figure emerged, and a Githyanki appeared near her, then waved a silver sword and stabbed into her body from the back. After exhausting all the protective spells, the northern witch in front of her was as fragile as a straw. In an instant, her heart was pierced by the enemy, and her neck was broken at the same time. Without protection, the wizards were harvested one by one. The dead northern witch gradually dissipated, and her body was restored to spiritual energy and disappeared. As for whether her body would wake up or not, it was a hard thing to say. Because when the soul projection died, one must go through a mandatory test of fortitude, will, and spirit. If one failed, one's strength may be reduced, and the body left behind may directly become a corpse. If one encountered an enemy in the astral plane who knew how to attack the soul, the possibility of the body becoming a corpse was as high as 90%. That was why Soren did not like to come to the astral plane. Because it was too dangerous. The first death of the northern witch made the Githyankis excited because they knew that the seemingly powerful senior witches in front of them were not invincible. The battle was still going on. However, others could no longer see Soren's figure because he had put all his skill points into sneak, and then his whole person completely entered the state of stealth. As long as no one cast detect stealth near him, then basically no one could rely on the detection ability to find Soren's trace. He was waiting for an opportunity. Not only was he waiting for the dragon to launch an attack, but he was also waiting for the witches to further consume the dragon's vitality. There were few spells that could kill a dragon in an instant. Even legendary spells were difficult to break through the adult dragon's top-level fortitude, but this did not mean that spells could not hurt it. In fact, when the red dragon flew over from the sky, it was already in a state of minor injury. The flapping of its wings destroyed the formation of the summoned creatures and killed all the low-level summoned creatures. Only the higher-level elemental creatures remained nearby. The red dragon was not in a hurry to deal with the witches because it knew that the witches were quite dangerous. If it was too impulsive, legendary spells would be waiting for it. The cunning red dragon did not like to use its life to resist legendary spells. Dragon Tail Sweep. The red dragon was cleaning up the nearby elementals. These summoned elementals were not its opponents, but killing them could greatly increase the pressure on the northern witches because the Githyankis could already attack them. Soren's figure was approaching little by little. When the red dragon, which was huge like a mountain of flesh in front of him, had just launched a dragon tail sweep, his figure suddenly flew out. Soren's target was the red dragon's abdomen, where he could directly attack the internal organs of the dragon. However, if he wanted to hit the dragon's heart, he could only rely on the dragon-slaying spear because the red dragon's body was too wide, and ordinary weapons could not reach the heart at all. In front of Soren were solid dark red dragon scales. When he approached the red dragon's body, the huge monster seemed to feel something. It waved its dragon wings and wanted to slap away the possible enemy. However, Soren dodged with a vigorous twist and directly avoided the powerful dragon wings. Then he clenched his curved sword and stabbed the scales of the red dragon's abdomen. Wuxia. It was a completely different feeling. Soren easily pierced the red dragon's body, as if it had no defensive dragon scales at all. Then he found that when he attacked just now, he just subconsciously stabbed the gap between the red dragon's scales. The dragon's scales were not a complete hole. They were solid scales and each scale had a small gap. It was useless to pierce through them from the front, but he could attack the part where the dragon's scales were connected by following the slope. This was something that Soren could not do in the past, because he did not have such superb skills to be able to maintain such amazing accuracy at the moment of launching an explosive attack. But he seemed to have done it now. Soren not only did it, but when he clenched his curved sword and stabbed it through the gap between the dragon's scales, he also felt the touch of the sword. He broke through the tough dragon skin and pierced into the muscle layer of the red dragon. After piercing through the muscle layer, the curved sword he clenched seemed to have become his fingers. The touch from the blade let him know that it was close to the muscle ligament. A living creature's body was made up of pieces of muscle. Muscle also had a strong defensive ability, but at the place where each piece of muscle was connected, its defensive ability was quite weak. Butcher Ding dissects an ox. This was the only analogy that Soren could think of. Butcher Ding was most familiar with cows, but Soren was most familiar with his sword. Curved sword, legendary, critical strike multiplier +1, critical strike +1. Chapter 320. The blade cut through the tendons and Soren actually felt very smooth. It felt like he was chopping firewood with a knife. He used to cut horizontally, which required a lot of strength. But now he was chopping vertically, using both the force of gravity and the path of the wood itself. This knife was supposed to be 3 inches deep into the red dragon's body before it lost its strength. But now Soren had stabbed nearly a foot deep, and at the same time he had opened up a nearly 3-inch wound. To put it simply, Soren had almost cut off a piece of flesh that weighed about 100 pounds from the red dragon's abdomen. It was just one cut. The red dragon let out a painful roar, which was even more painful than when it was hit by a round of spells from the northern witches. Spirit spells could not control the will of the dragon, and damage spells could not break the protection of the dragon's scales. Since the destruction of the Arcane Empire, people had mentioned the elemental tide more than once, and they had cited a large number of changes in pure-blood dragons to prove the impact of the elemental tide on other creatures. The lifespan of dragons could be as long as thousands of years. Some of the dragons who had lived for quite a long time could clearly see the greater impact of time on their power. This theory eventually pointed to the peak of the elemental tide about 300 to 500 years later. Some people suspected that this would lead to the rise of the Dragon Island. The witches' formation was completely messed up. They did not come with their real bodies, so they only retained about 80% of their strength. Both the casting level and the strength of the spells were much lower than the strength of the real body. A wizard's projection could retain about 70% of their strength. Although the soul projection's combat power was stronger, it could only retain about 80%. It was said that the Arcane Empire used to have a powerful spell called Simulacrum, which could retain more than 90% of the combat power, but this spell had been lost for a long time. After the destruction of the Arcane Empire, many spells were lost, especially those from other planes. For a half-baked wizard like Soren, the reduction in strength was not obvious because he did not have many spell slots to begin with. All he could do was throw out arcane missiles once and for all. Moreover, the soul projection of the rogue class did not reduce attributes. It only slightly affected basic skills in various aspects. Therefore, entering the astral plane had the least impact on him. He retained most of his attribute points in his soul projection state, and it just so happened that Soren's battle power was largely supported by his attribute points. A whistling gust of wind came from behind. When Soren cut through the dragon's scales and dealt quite a bit of damage to the red dragon, its long and narrow tail was raised in the air and whipped towards him. Soren didn't dare to take the attack head-on, so he quickly pulled out his scimitar and retreated. When he pulled out his scimitar, a large amount of dragon blood spurted out from his wound. The boiling dragon blood dripped onto Soren's body. The red dragon's blood was hotter than the white dragon's. It was like boiling water, and Soren was slightly scalded. This kind of injury would not affect Soren's battle power, but it made his body tremble slightly. He could only rely on his strong dexterity and flexibility to twist his body in half to dodge the attack. He then flew up and landed a kick on the side of the red dragon. Because the tail was raised, he saw a huge chrysanthemum. He had to admit that the excretory organs of a giant dragon were not much different from other creatures. However, this should be one of the few places that was not protected by dragon scales. The giant dragon's excrement was a very useful tool in the wild. It could repel other wild monsters so they would not dare to approach and attack adventurers. Since there was giant dragon's excrement, they also had excretory organs. For any creature, this place was considered a critical spot. Usually it was protected by the dragon's tail, so there was basically no chance to attack it. However, when the red dragon swept its tail at Soren's body, it created a hole in his defense that lasted for about a second and a half. Soren, who had never talked about any honorable means, immediately stabbed into the enemy after seeing that the enemy had exposed the area without the protection of dragon scales. When he subconsciously stabbed into the enemy's body with his curved sword, he realized that the position he attacked was quite special. Damn it! This red dragon was actually a female. The enemy's gender did not affect Soren's battle sense. When the red dragon let out an earth-shattering roar and turned its head to spit dragon's breath at him, Soren had already retreated into the shadows and activated the Shadow Dancer's new ability, Shadow Leap. This was a common ability for rogues, but Shadow Dancers mastered it earlier. If it was a purebred rogue, it might be around the level of a quasi-legendary. This was a very important prerequisite skill, and it was the most important escape and pursuit skill for rogues. It was a little different from Shadow Jump. Shadow Leap, supernatural ability. As the rogue's connection with the shadow plane becomes closer and closer, they begin to master the mysterious Shadow Leap ability. They can shuttle and jump in the shadows just like the wizard's Anywhere Door spell. This Shadow Leap ability does not require them to enter stealth. As long as they are in the shadows, rogues can perform Shadow Leap. This jump distance is up to 100 meters, but it can be divided into any number of times. Before mastering a special advanced ability, the limit of Shadow Leap in a day is 100 meters. Note: this ability can be used 10 times, each jump a distance of 10 meters. It can also be used once, each jump a distance of 100 meters. This was the legendary Shadow Leap. It was a more flexible and useful ability than Shadow Jump. It did not require them to enter stealth, they only needed to be in the shadows. Then they could launch a jump ability similar to Anywhere Door and be immune to spells such as Epidemic Dimensional Anchor. However, this supernatural ability had a weakness, that was, its limit was 100 meters. Unless they mastered a very special ability, they could only jump a distance of 100 meters at most. From this point of view, Shadow Leap was completely inferior to the legendary skill, Shadow Step, because the latter had greater freedom and greater lethality. In fact, Soren had been considering whether to upgrade the profession level of rogues or wizards. One was the current combat power, the other was the future combat potential. Boom. The fierce flame was like an explosion. Soren only jumped about 15 meters. Shadow Leap could only be used in the shadows that he could see. Only those above the legendary level could feel the invisible shadows. Soren's thin figure disappeared in the shadows and then reappeared in the shadows. In a flash, he completely avoided the dragon's breath. In fact, the gap between rogues and wizards was gradually narrowing since they entered the higher grade. Otherwise, they would not be second only to the Sword Saint and have the ability to assassinate wizards. Soren relied on many supernatural abilities to deal with wizards in the past. The changes on the battlefield were ever-changing. The situation of the northern witches seemed to be a bit bad. The tactic of the Githyankis was to constantly remove magic and then rely on the psionic warriors to attack the enemy. This caused a lot of trouble for the northern witches. If they did not continuously buff their defensive energy field, they would be easily exposed to the attack range of the psionic warriors. However, once they continuously buffed their defensive spells, they would fall into a passive situation of a war of attrition because there would always be a moment when the spell slots would be used up. The fragile body of wizards was doomed to be difficult to support for a long time without the buff of the at-force field. because the ones attacking them were all advanced warriors from the astral plane. Dang. A strange figure appeared out of thin air, then waved the Gith's silver blade and slashed at a northern witch who had exhausted her defensive spells. Wizards could only remember 1/3 of the defensive spells at most, so when her defensive spells were used up, she could only counterattack by throwing a large number of control spells, killing a lot of Githyanki's in front of her. However, without the protection of the energy field, her existence was quite fragile and became the target of many psionic warriors. The Gith's silver blade was flowing with silver cold light, and it directly pierced the heart of the northern witch. Dang dang dang. Then, something unexpected happened. The northern witch, who had almost exhausted all her defensive spells, suddenly seemed to trigger some kind of unexpected spell, and then she waved her staff to block the psionic warrior in front of her. Strength, agility, reflexes. No matter from which point of view, it was almost impossible for the northern witch to block the attack of an advanced warrior. But she did block it. Tansen's polymorph. The psionic warrior in front of her seemed to realize something, but it was a little late. The northern witch, who looked very delicate in front of him, directly swung her staff and broke one of his arms on the spot. Then the staff hit his head horizontally. The scene was simply horrible. At a glance, it could be judged that the strength of the witch had reached about 20 points because she almost smashed the opponent's skull. Everyone who saw this could not help but frown. At the same time, Soren, who saw this scene by accident, was surprised. Tansen's polymorph? Soren rolled away from the range of the dragon breath and murmured, "I didn't expect there to be a combat wizard who is proficient in polymorph among the northern witches." Combat wizard. A spellcaster of a special school. They mainly focused on polymorph spells. For example, at a lower level they could learn polymorph, which could transform into animals, spiders, pterosaurs and other creatures. At a higher level they could learn Tansen's polymorph, which was close to the combat power of a warrior of the same level. In the future they could also learn a variety of special polymorph spells, as well as legendary spells that could transform into giants, golems, demons and other creatures. This was a very rare school of wizards. Especially after the destruction of the Arcane Empire, there were fewer and fewer wizards who mastered high-grade polymorph spells. Tansen's polymorph, level 6 spell, strength, dexterity and constitution increased to 20 points, natural armor +4, strong reflex +5, automatic mastery of military weapons, vitality equivalent to a warrior of the same level, loss of spellcasting ability during the spell. P.S. I only got home at 10:30, barely wrote a chapter. Tomorrow at 3 o'clock. Chapter 321. Shadow Leap. Soren's curved sword seemed to have caused considerable physical damage and unimaginable psychological damage to the red dragon, so the red dragon in front of him seemed to be about to go berserk. There seemed to be a trace of fire in the red dragon's pupils. The red dragon became violent, waving its tail and sweeping around. A large amount of dragon blood oozed out from the position near the excretory organ. The strong dragon wings set off gusts of wind, blowing sand and stones around. Not only were the nearby elemental summons hit, but even the Githyanki's who were too close were affected by the berserk red dragon. Evade sight. Soren's figure once again disappeared into the shadows. Leveling up the shadow dancer increased the number of times he could evade sight. As long as he kept a certain distance, it would be difficult to lock his position even if someone wanted to use detection invisibility. Unless someone cast the sixth circle, Eye of Detection, which was an area of effect detection spell. However, the red dragon obviously didn't have such a high level of casting. Soren had been quietly watching the berserk red dragon while waiting for the next opportunity to attack. Fighting against a dragon must not be rushed because any creature could not withstand a heavy blow from them. The situation of the northern witches seemed to be a bit bad, because the spell slots of the high-grade witches were about to be used up, and the spell slots of the wizards were never that abundant. Even legendary wizards had to be careful when using spells. Therefore, the human wave tactic was the most effective tactic for wizards. Unless the wizard intended to use teleportation to escape, sooner or later, they would run out of spell slots. In the past, such a powerful blade master was also a wizard, but in the end, his spell slots were used up. In the end, a group of people exhausted him to death. The casualties of the Githyanki's were close to 100. One of the northern witches seemed to have died, and another was in a bit of a dangerous situation. Fortunately, Gloria was fine. She had been staying near the Eye of the North and basically the psionic warriors could not threaten her for the time being. However, if this dragged on, the situation would be a little bad. No one knew what the Eye of the North was thinking. Even at this time she still hadn't started preparing a legendary spell. A high grade which like Gloria could only cast level 8 spells in her soul projection state. Moreover, she would only have 1 or 2 spell slots at most. Perhaps it could cause quite a bit of damage to the enemy, but it was absolutely impossible to turn the situation around. The only one who could turn the situation around was the Eye of the North and an elderly witch with a lot of white hair. She was also a legendary witch with a profession level of 21. Bang! A violent muffled sound came from behind. The sound was like a meatball being shot out. Then everyone found that a middle-aged witch who was besieged by the Githyanki suddenly began to swell violently, and then her body underwent tremendous changes in an instant. Her height had increased to nearly 7 meters, and her whole body was covered with strong muscles. Her heavy chest was like a pair of big meatballs. Clear and heavy footprints appeared on the ground. The middle-aged witch, who had turned into a giant in an instant, roared and punched down, smashing a Githyanki's into a meat patty. Frost Giant Transformation. Level 9 spell. Heavy footsteps sounded on the battlefield. The female frost giant, who was nearly 2 stories tall, slowly stood up. Her body seemed to be surrounded by cold air, and her strong muscles were full of explosive power. Although it seemed a bit unsightly to be naked, no one could ignore the terrible power in her body. That was the breath of a legendary creature. Frost giants were legendary creatures comparable to dragons. They were humanoid creatures close to the peak of power on the earth. This time it was not only Soren who was surprised. Even the other witches nearby, including Gloria in the battle, showed a shocked expression and murmured, "Has Witch Paisley cracked the spell scroll of the legendary transformation spell? It seems that she has successfully advanced into a legendary battle wizard." A wizard. Of course, it was not a group of people who only knew how to cast spells. There were also quite different and violent spells among the wizards. Battle wizards who could transform were the best among them. They could transform into beasts, monsters, insects, golems, dragons, demons, devils, and so on. If there was a battle, in addition to the original spells, they could also transform into various creatures according to the environment to deal with the enemy and special geographical environment. The Frost Giant transformation in front of them was a level 9 spell, which belonged to legendary creatures. However, the complete version seemed to have more than one kind of transformation. Eye of the North also looked at the middle-aged witch who had transformed into a huge female frost giant. She frowned slightly and thought for a moment, then said in a deep voice, "Not good." She didn't completely crack the transformation spell. The complete transformation spell should be able to transform into other legendary creatures every minute. It seems that she can only transform into a frost giant. It seems that she can't control herself. Naturally, the spells of wizards were also very dangerous. Among them, the most representative was the transformation spell. The low-grade transformation spell had a test of death every time it changed. It could cause irreparable damage or lead to death in the process of transformation. Therefore, any shape-shifting battle wizard that appeared were basically high-grade spellcasters. With a height of more than 7 meters, it was not difficult for her to use such a move on the adult red dragon. Then everyone saw the huge red dragon, which weighed dozens of tons, was directly thrown out by her. As a wizard, she was also proficient in close combat. Bang! The red dragon's huge body smashed into the ground, creating a crater. When 2 creatures of the same size fought, there was no obvious crushing effect. The female frost giant was not afraid of the red dragon at all. This time she successfully took the initiative to counterattack, then turned around and rushed over, raising her millstone-sized fist and smashing the red dragon's head. Good chance. Soren, who had been wandering around the periphery, would not let go of such a good opportunity. When the red dragon's body was thrown out, he was already quickly approaching. So when the female frost giant raised her millstone-sized fist and smashed the red dragon's head, Soren held his curved sword tightly and stabbed into the red dragon's leg joint. The difference in size in a battle was very obvious. Soren's attack on the red dragon was like using an embroidery needle to stab a certain part of an adult's body. Even if the wound was bleeding, it was limited. So Soren's piercing attack was painful, but the damage was not necessarily fatal. On the contrary, the huge frost giant's fist hit the red dragon's head, and immediately, it was like an adult fighting with a fist on the red dragon's eye socket. In an instant, the whole eye socket was swollen and bruised, and even the eye socket was directly smashed open. Ouch! The red dragon was hit by the frost giant's fist and was directly smashed to the ground. This was also because there were no frost giant weapons on the battlefield. If the frost giant was given a full set of plate armor and a weapon that weighed more than a ton, she would be unbeatable in a crowd. Perhaps this adult red dragon might not be able to withstand a few hits, but there was certainly no condition for that battle now. Most of the time, wizards won because they were well prepared, and they died because they were not well prepared. Sudden encounters. Some battles were difficult to be perfect. Chapter 322. Sword form, spinning strike. Sword form, horizontal slash. Shadow strike. What should Soren do when the red dragon was pinned to the ground by the frost giant? Without a doubt, he must take advantage of this time to cause as much damage to the enemy as possible, and then drag the red dragon into a state of serious injury. The vitality of the dragon was quite amazing. Although it had been fighting for a long time, in fact, it was just approaching the state of serious injury. However, Soren did not get close to the upper body of the red dragon because he believed that the most powerful red dragon would not be so weak. It would not be unable to fight back after a round of attacks from the frost giant. Besides, its big head could bite people. Roar! Shrill screams sounded at the same time. There was an adult red dragon that was seriously injured by Soren, and there was also a female frost giant that was attacked. Her arm was directly bitten by the red dragon. Even though the frost giants had strong natural armor, their bones and skin were almost bitten off. The bite force of the dragon was quite amazing. In fact, because of their many abilities in other aspects, it was easy to ignore the bite force of the dragon. However, Soren naturally remembered how fatal the bite of the dragon was because one of his arms was bitten off in the past. In the end, he could only ask a high-grade priest to cast limb restoration. The attack of the female frost giant was finally interrupted. The red dragon opened its mouth and bit the female frost giant tightly. At the same time, it struggled to turn over its huge dragon body and get up. With their huge size, the battle scene was a bit like the battle of the dinosaurs in the Jurassic era, and it was the battle between the Tyrannosaurus rex and the Spinosaurus. When the two sides fought, the earth shook and the mountains shook. If Soren was accidentally stepped on by any one of them, he could be seriously injured or even killed on the spot. Because Soren could not bear dozens of tons of weight. Poochie. A large amount of dragon blood flowed out. Soren's expression was serious as he waved his curved sword and pierced it. At the same time, he carefully avoided the sweeping tail of the dragon and the twisting body of the red dragon. Without a specialized dragon-slaying weapon, it would definitely be inconvenient to fight against a giant dragon. Whether it was the dragon-slaying sword or the dragon-slaying spear, they were all specially designed legendary equipment that could effectively attack the vital organs of a giant dragon. Unlike Soren's attack, it was difficult for him to damage the dragon's internal organs due to the length of his weapon. However, he wasn't completely helpless. Soren swung his scimitar and sliced open the scales of the red dragon. Then he cut into the enemy's body through the muscle tissue and severed the red dragon's tendons. A row of data appeared. Battle experience. You comprehended something during the battle. Grasped partial information of the combat skill sword form, tendon break. Battle experience. You comprehended something during the battle. Grasped some information about the combat skill sword form, split. 2 consecutive data prompts appeared. However, Soren didn't have time to look at it at this time because he relied on his powerful curved sword, legendary, ability to successfully pierce the red dragon's body, cut off the dragon tendons very accurately, and cut the blood vessels of the red dragon's legs. He couldn't do this kind of attack in the past because he didn't have such accuracy when he attacked in the past. However, now that he had the legendary, curved sword, his attacks on the enemy became more accurate and deadly. Sword form, tendon break. Combat skill. Through special combat skills, you can sever the tendons of the enemy's hands and feet in battle. It can greatly reduce the combat ability of ordinary enemies. It is also very effective against some supernatural creatures. The enemy must undergo a mandatory constitution test. Otherwise they may be paralyzed, disabled, and other negative statuses. Sword form, split. Combat skill. Through special combat skills, you can sever the enemy's blood vessels in battle. This will cause the enemy's bleeding status to worsen, and they may die from excessive blood loss in a short period of time. Boiling dragon blood splattered all over the ground. Soren's whole body was covered in blood. When he severed the red dragon's tendons, he also severed one of its arteries. Although supernatural creatures with strong vitality wouldn't die quickly because of this, it would worsen their bleeding status. Soren's dragon blood spurted out because he accurately hit the arteries. He clenched his curved sword and exerted force along the muscles of the red dragon's leg. In just a few seconds he cut off more than 300 pounds of dragon meat. The scene was a little horrifying. Soren's sword cut through pieces of flesh and blood. In the end, the bones of the red dragon's leg could be seen. It was as if it was almost skinned alive by Soren. The frost giant seemed to have recovered a little from the red dragon's attack. As a northern witch who was close to the legendary level, she decisively chose to cut off her arm that was bitten by the red dragon. Then she used her other remaining arm to choke the red dragon's neck. At the same time she turned over and rode on the red dragon's neck. This was the weak point of its strength. When the red dragon's long and narrow neck was pressed down, it wouldn't be easy for it to turn over. It was as if she had grasped the weak spot of a snake. Soren seemed to have entered a very wonderful state. It couldn't be said that he had a breakthrough, but he did have a lot of improvement in his combat skills. A row of data prompts appeared again. Combat experience. You have gained enlightenment in the battle. You have mastered part of the combat skill sword form, tendon break. Combat experience. You have gained enlightenment in the battle. You have mastered part of the combat skill sword form, split. Combat experience. You have gained enlightenment in the battle. You have successfully mastered the combat skill sword form, spinning strike. Bang. The thick and long dragon tail whipped over with a whistling wind, and then directly wrapped around the frost giant's neck with amazing flexibility, and then pulled her down on the spot. The red dragon roared angrily, and a pair of dragon wings flapped out on the spot. At the same time it turned over and tried to get up. The challenge rating of an adult frost giant was the same as that of a young dragon, so sometimes in the wild, frost giants could be encountered fighting with dragons, but most of them were white dragons that belonged to the same cold region. It was not rare for giants and dragons to fight. Therefore, the red dragon's brain also had inherited the combat skills of dealing with giants. After it shook off the frost giant, it took a deep breath, and then suddenly opened its mouth and spat out a scorching dragon breath. The power of frost filled the air. The scorching flames were raging. The attributes of the frost giant and the red dragon were opposite. When they collided, even the elemental power in the air fluctuated violently. The red dragon struggled to stand up. But suddenly, its body shook again and its huge body staggered and almost fell to the ground. At this time, the others realized that more than 500 pounds of flesh and blood had been cut off from the right thigh of the red dragon. Half of the dragon's leg was exposed to the white bones. The whole battle lasted less than a minute. The red dragon felt the pain of being attacked, but it never thought that the enemy would cause it so much damage. Soren was dismembering the red dragon. Although he wasn't able to deliver a fatal blow, he dismembered one of the red dragon's legs and used the sword form, spinning strike, twice on the dragon's wings. Brr, brr, bang. The red dragon flapped its huge dragon wings, trying to regain its balance. Unfortunately, half of its leg was a skeleton. Clang. The curved sword in Soren's hand slashed across the air. As his figure moved around the red dragon, the wounds on its leg increased. Large pieces of flesh and blood were cut off, and the sturdy dragon scales seemed to have lost their function. They were accurately cut open by Soren again and again. Some wounds only needed to be torn open, and the next thing to do was to make the wound bigger. Therefore, when Soren's second round of attacks ended, large pieces of white bones could be seen on the red dragon's leg. Most creatures that relied on wings to fly would kick their legs before they took off. Therefore, the legendary experts could reduce the force of a bird's kick and make it unable to fly out of the palm of their hands. Although the red dragon could barely stand, it was quite difficult for it to fly again. His body was a little shaky. A lot of blood loss, Soren's damage, and the frost giant's attacks had gradually dragged it to the brink of death. Chapter 323. The red dragon was in a state of near death. Soren's attacks became more and more cautious. He even opened up a distance and then disappeared into the shadows again. Only the frost giant and the red dragon continued to fight each other. Soren needed to get the last hit. Only when he ended the red dragon's life could he gain a lot of slaughter EXP. The red dragon gave the highest slaughter EXP among all the dragon species. It was estimated to be about twice as much as an adult white dragon. It was enough for Soren to level up his wizard profession by about 2 levels, or to level up his shadow dancer profession by 1 level. The slaughter EXP from slaying a dragon was quite amazing. The red dragon's breath gradually weakened, and the frost giant's condition was not very good. The nearby Githyankis tried to help the red dragon, but they were all blocked by Gloria. The northern witches obviously realized that if they killed the red dragon first, the pressure they had to bear would be reduced a lot. At least, they would not have to worry about the dangerous red dragon's wings. The northern witches, who had activated Tan Sen's transformation, even stood in front of the red dragon and waved their staffs like high-grade warriors. When a wizard reached this level, they were not afraid of close combat. Although she had lost the ability to cast spells, there were other witches nearby who gave her protection spells. For a moment, she blocked 3 to 5 Githyankis by herself. The opportunity Soren had been waiting for finally appeared. When the red dragon's head showed an obvious flaw, Soren's figure flew out. He directly jumped a distance of nearly 50 meters in the shadows and instantly appeared under the shadow of the red dragon's neck. He then jumped and stabbed the red dragon's huge eyeball with his sword. With a splash of blood and penetrating the red dragon's eyeball, Soren's curved sword directly sank into the red dragon's brain. The red dragon's huge body trembled for a moment, and then it shook its head violently. Soren was sure that he had stabbed into the red dragon's head, and he might have even hurt its brain. However, the fact that the red dragon did not die under such circumstances could only mean one thing. Its incomparably powerful vitality allowed it to survive the judgment of death. Damn it! Soren didn't expect the enemy's vitality to be so tenacious. His body swayed in the air with the dragon's head, and he didn't have the strength to pull out his curved sword icing death. So he could only let go of his hands and let his body fall. At the same time, he held the silver sword of Gith +3 with both hands at the moment of falling. Then he jumped up when he touched the ground, holding the sword with both hands and slashing at the neck of the red dragon. Clang! The silver blade of Gith was stuck in the neck of the red dragon. This baptism has strengthened your body and allowed you to inherit part of the red dragon's ability. The dragon blood has made you stronger. You've inherited part of the strongest red dragon among the pentashade dragons. At the same time, because of the effect of the red dragon's blood, you've permanently gained 10 points of fire resistance. Innate armor +1, toughness +2, fire resistance +10. Note, because of the dragon blood baptism in the soul projection state, part of the dragon's ability cannot be obtained. Finally, the red dragon was killed. Soren slowly stood up. He now looked like he had suffered a level 10 burn, and was basically completely unrecognizable. However, his aura was quite amazing. Just now, after successfully slaying the dragon, his spirit had reached its peak state. It felt like a hidden sword for 10 years, unsheathed in one day feeling. His completely burned face didn't affect his aura at all. On the contrary, it made him more dangerous and deadly. This aura. If it was during normal times, it would make people feel dangerous and repulsed. But now, in Gloria's eyes, it represented a sense of security. It made her feel that as long as Soren didn't fall, she would be safe. Just like the time when she encountered the believers of the god of hunting, Soren gave her the same feeling now. But this time it was stronger and hotter. At this moment she couldn't help but tremble. It was an indescribable feeling. She was wet. Chapter 324. What is a real man? It's not sex, it's fighting. Soren bathed in the dragon's blood and stood up. Even though he had not yet entered the realm of legends, he gave people a sense of oppression, which made the other Giths nearby step back a lot. Especially those Giths who met Soren's gaze, there was even a rare trace of fear on their faces. It was a fear that was not produced even when they were facing the Northern Witch's deadly spell, but when they met Soren's gaze it was revealed. Fearful gaze, divinity. At the right place at the right time, the hidden bonus from the outside world made Soren's fearful gaze reach its peak effect. The enemy seemed to be afraid. They could not help but show panic on their faces. They retreated a lot of distance in succession and then gradually recovered. This was not a spell. Therefore, the difficulty of immunity was even greater because Soren was now exerting a strong psychological pressure on them. Soren, who was covered in blood, looked ferocious. The hot blood of the red dragon had completely disfigured him, so at this moment he looked like a demon coming out of the abyss. His expression was very calm, but his eyes were full of killing desire and oppression. The minor divinity further strengthened Soren's pressure on any non-divine creatures, so much so that even the Eye of the North looked at him in surprise. Divinity? The Eye of the North glanced at Soren with all his white eyes, then slowly turned his head and said to Gloria beside him, "Protect me. I want to prepare the last part of the spell ritual." A powerful spiritual power burst out. Gloria nodded silently, then activated several pieces of equipment in succession. At the same time, she added defensive means such as protective energy field, elemental energy protection, spell reversal, and so on. At the same time, she took out a rather delicate ring. After activating the runes engraved on it, the gem inlaid on the ring gradually dimmed, and then another protective force field that Soren did not know covered the two of them. This kind of protection could almost be said to be watertight, and even legendary professions could not break it in a short time. The Eye of the North seemed to be chanting a spell, but there was no sound coming out of her mouth. Soren, who was ready to rush forward, froze for a moment, then he seemed to remember something. He turned around and rushed to Gloria's position. If in the astral plane, where spells below level 6 could be cast instantly, even a legendary which with a profession level of close to level 25 would need to chant a spell, then there was no doubt that the spell she cast was above level 9, and it was very likely to be a legendary spell of a higher level. Because the destruction of the Arcane Kingdom led to the disappearance of some legendary spells, the boundary between level 9 spells and legendary spells was relatively blurred. Silent spell cast. The metamagic ability that wizards could master allowed them to increase the level of their spells by 1 level and then silently release them. This was a more difficult ability to master than strengthened spell, but it was slightly easier than instant cast. The Eye of the North in front of him did not just master the metamagic ability, silent spell. According to Soren's judgment, the reason why this legendary which did not have any special performance until now was because she had been using silent spell to cast a spell that was close to the legendary level. This required a very powerful metamagic ability, because if it was a legendary spell, the ability, silent spell, was not enough. Conservatively speaking, she would have to master the metamagic ability, silent spell release, and the legendary metamagic ability, silent spell release, circle 1, to silent spell release, circle 9. When she had this legendary metamagic ability, she could cast any spell silently, and it would not increase the spell level by 1. Level 8 spells also had level 8 spell slots, and it would not increase to level 9 spell slots because of the use of silent spell. From this point of view, the Eye of the North's silent spell skills were close to the peak of the material plane. Because even at this moment, Soren did not feel the slightest trace of her casting a legendary spell. The elemental energy around seemed to have been neutralized. The enemy had been attacking the Northern Witch for so long, but they still thought that the legendary witch had been holding back, but no one thought that she had been casting a spell for more than 10 minutes. And this spell seemed to have not been completed until now. It was basically impossible to make Soren believe that she was not casting a legendary spell. A wizard's ability. Soren's figure was quickly approaching Gloria, and at the same time he silently said in his heart, from spell control, combat casting, empower spell, maximize spell, spell penetration, silent spell, fixed spell, instant spell, and so on, and then all the way to the 9th level of the legendary metamagic ability. The path of a spellcaster is really difficult. I don't even have enough time to learn spells of the same level. I don't know when I'll have time to practice these metamagic abilities. Spellcasters sometimes competed with metamagic abilities. Not to mention the most terrifying instant spell, a legendary spell like the Eye of the North could be cast silently. If it was used to ambush people, it would definitely be successful in every endeavor. There was no sign of casting a spell at all. There was no need to chant a spell, and there was no need to focus on casting a spell. The enemy could only be aware of it at the moment when the spell was completed. Sure enough, the longer a spellcaster lived, the more terrible they were. Even if the profession level did not increase, the metamagic ability that was mastered over a long period of time could make people shudder. Buzz. The whole half-plane seemed to shake. When Soren approached Gloria, the Eye of the North also seemed to have completed this legendary spell. She raised her staff and pointed at the endless starry sky, and then her whole body leaned on Gloria's shoulder a little dispirited. At this time, the Githyanki's realized that something was wrong. A group of people rushed over under the command of the Githyanki's queen. The queen's combat power was not weak. It was estimated that she was a legendary profession, but she did not participate in the frontal battle from beginning to end. Perhaps the higher the status, the easier it was for people to be afraid of death. Buzz. The half-plane shook again. However, Soren did not see any abnormality, as if the legendary spell had just failed. There was no terrible attack. The Githyankis were still surrounding them and attacking. The situation on the battlefield was still not very favorable to them. But this situation only lasted for about 10 seconds. 10 seconds later, a faint light appeared in the sky, and then a huge comet crossed the sky, and then approached their position at an amazing speed. Be careful. A white light appeared in the pupil of the Eye of the North, and the body of the soul projection gradually grew larger. It seemed that she had launched some special spell. With a wave of her hand, a light curtain shrouded the others, including Soren, who was fighting beside her, and turned them all into a form similar to a spirit. This was another form of soul. The spell cast by the Eye of the North was a bit like the level 9 spell, Spirit World Travel, but it was very different from Soren's memory. This was because the casting speed of this spell was rather fast, and it also covered a relatively large area. Almost all of the surviving witches were enveloped within it. The next moment, the telepathic voice of the Eye of the North was transmitted to the minds of all the witches. She said in a deep voice, "All transform into soul state. Everyone follow me back to the material plane." Comet. Legendary spell. Soren's body, which had been unrecognizable, quickly turned into a spirit form. The terrible burns on his face gradually disappeared, and the severely burned and cracked skin all disappeared. The whole person turned into the original soul state, which was not much different from Soren's original body in the material plane. If there was any difference, it would be that Soren's soul had an extra red color. This red color looked very much like the evil aura that appeared when detecting factions, but it was the power of the red dragon from the dragon blood baptism. Time freeze. Soren's soul rose and was sent back to the material plane by the half-plane. At the moment his soul returned to the material plane, he saw a comet about 150 meters in diameter hitting the half-plane. Then a terrible energy burst out like a shock wave, and the terrible impact made the half-plane seem to open a ring. The dust clouds covered the entire sky of the half-plane, and the dazzling light was so strong that even the soul could not bear it. The flames covered more than 50 kilometers, and the scorching heat spread throughout the half-plane. It was like detonating an atomic bomb. Everything was ruthlessly destroyed. Under the impact of the comet, the military fortress of the Githyanki was instantly crushed like a piece of tofu. Even the space of the half-plane showed signs of collapse. Legendary spell. Although it was not the first time Soren saw it, everything in front of him was still so shocking. Note 1. From July 16 to 22, 1994, a comet named Shoemaker-Levy 9 broke into 21 pieces, the largest of which was about 4 kilometers wide, and hit Jupiter at a speed of 60 kilometers per second. The first piece of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, containing rocks and ice, fell into Jupiter's atmosphere at 2015 Greenwich Mean Time on July 16 at a speed of 210,000 kilometers per hour, releasing energy equivalent to 200 billion tons of TNT. After the impact, multiple fireballs were produced that stretched for nearly 1,000 kilometers, emitting strong light. Through astronomical telescopes, people saw a wide cloud of dust rising on the surface of Jupiter. The hot gas rushed to a height of 1,000 kilometers and left an impact mark on Jupiter the size of the Earth. Scientists determined that in the period before the collision of the Wisdom Tree, the strong electromagnetic waves emitted by Jupiter were 9 times stronger than usual, and the temperature at the splash point of the impact instantly rose to tens of thousands of degrees Celsius. Note 2. Comet is one of the few legendary spells that can directly destroy a plane. Chapter 325. Well, there have been a lot of forbidden words recently, and the chapter review was inexplicably blocked. The third update will be postponed to tomorrow. Legendary spell. Though there were many legendary spells that the adepts had mastered, the comet spell was always the most shocking and oppressive one. To any enemy, a magus who had mastered the comet spell was a terrifying existence. The military fortress of the Githyanki was destroyed under the impact of comet. This steel fortress built with magic energy machinery was shattered by comet in an instant. The terrible high temperature melted everything. The impact was only the beginning of the energy explosion, and the chain reaction that followed would last for a long time. Very few creatures could survive the attack of comet. Even the incarnation of the gods could be killed directly. The only way to deal with comet was to escape across the plane. Under normal circumstances, any defensive spell in the same plane would be broken in an instant. The Githyanki suffered heavy losses. Soren could not estimate the casualties of the enemy, but he knew that this group of Githyanki was almost completely finished. Even if there were survivors under the attack of comet, it was only those who were lucky enough to master the ability to teleport across the plane. As for others who could only open any door for short-distance teleportation, basically all of them died under the impact of comet. Even the military fortress built by the group would be destroyed. This group of Githyanki was almost equivalent to being exterminated because it was impossible to build such a fortress without hundreds of years. The remaining fish that escaped the net could no longer threaten the Northern Witch Council. All the souls returned to the material plane. After the half-plane withstood the impact of comet, the power of its own law began to repair the damage of the half-plane. Above this half-plane, where the Githyanki's military fortress broke through, there was a place similar to the ozone layer hole. With the convergence of the power of the law, the hole broken by the Githyankis gradually healed, but the surrounding space seemed to be distorted, and there was another force connected to the material plane. A shadow emerged under the starry sky. His whole body was shrouded in dark smoke, and he stood in the darkness of the sky like void. This was not his real body but a very advanced projection. He looked at the half-plane in front of him, frowned slightly, and then murmured, "Sure enough, it's better to let this group of idiot Githyankis test the depth of the Northern Witch Council. After this old woman came back from the abyss, she could still hold on for hundreds of years. She can't be easy to deal with. A legendary witch? Sure enough, even the gods are a little afraid of her existence. But why did she insist on keeping that thing? Is she also interested in the power of the evil god? It's not easy to deal with them. But this half-plane seems to be a breakthrough point. In order to support the growth of this semi-plane, they actually connected the semi-plane to the northern lands of the material plane. What a crazy behavior. Aren't they worried about plane collisions? What? There's still one alive? The dark shadow appeared in the half-plane. He looked at the distorted space in front of him and said strangely, "It turns out that she hid in a different dimension space. What a lucky guy." Pada. Queen Githyanki's, dressed in gorgeous clothes, fell out of the distorted space. She stared blankly at the unrecognizable land and opened her mouth as if she wanted to say something. But at this time, a strange light appeared in the eyes of the dark shadow, and then he saw that Queen Githyanki's eyes gradually became blank as if she was controlled by some kind of spell. A useful chess piece. The dark shadow floated in the air. He raised his hand and waved to cover Queen Githyanki's in front of him in an energy shield. Then he silently looked at the half-plane in front of him and murmured, "Although it's quite dangerous. But the person who came up with this method is definitely a genius. To be able to grow a half-plane to such an extent in just 100 years, it's really a speed that even the gods are amazed." Material plane? He leaned over and picked up a handful of soil on the ground and said in a low voice, "Is this soil from the material plane? What method did the northern witches use to connect this half-plane to the energy supply of the material plane? Maybe I should sneak into them and spy on them." The pitch-black shadow dissipated. The whole half-plane gradually returned to calm. Although this new half-plane was not small in size, there was almost no life in it. It was just growing day by day, growing dozens of square meters of space every day. It may seem difficult to notice, but after a year, 10 years, and 100 years of accumulation, it was a quite large new space. There was soil and air here, but something was still missing. It had not yet begun to breathe life, but it was really a little unusual. Everything seemed to be over for the time being. This half-plane, which still looked very young in the astral world, was shrouded in a layer of iris. The new law power protected this space, and then it was like other planes, floating in this almost endless sea of astral world. This was the accumulation of the Northern Witch Council for hundreds of years. Perhaps it was not as good as the divine kingdom that the gods had been operating for thousands of years, but it was undeniable that it had great potential for growth. Material plane. Soren's soul appeared outside the astral world portal. Before he could react, the portal was closed by the Eye of the North. At the same time, all the souls fell like meteors and flew to their bodies in the wizard tower. A moment of trance. Chapter 326. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, search for the WeChat public account Dread, and follow it to give more support to Lord of the Abyss. The light of a portal appeared. Gloria glanced at Soren gently, then nodded gently and said, "Come with me." The two got up and walked into the portal. When entering the portal, Soren frowned slightly. The scene just now made him think of a lot of things. First of all, the wizard towers of the Northern Witch Council were all connected together. This was a huge maze with great power. Then, although Gloria was the owner of this wizard tower, the Eye of the North also seemed to have control of this wizard tower, and may have a higher control authority than Gloria. This could be seen from the fact that she just casually opened the portal of the wizard tower. In other words, this wizard tower still belonged to the Witch Council, but it was managed by Gloria. And it seemed that the Eye of the North had a strong control over the Witch Council, and she also had a strong prestige in Gloria's heart. As a veteran legendary who had been in charge of the North for hundreds of years, the Eye of the North's status and influence were quite amazing. If he could get her favor, it was basically equivalent to winning over the Witch Council, which was very important for Soren, who currently lacked strong allies. Another pirate king, Ashrod, was backed by the Naga Siren royal family, and the sea priest did everything for the Church of the Sea Goddess. Soren needed forces outside the south coast as his allies, and it would not affect his strength in the outer islands. Although it was just a very insignificant matter, Soren judged a lot of things and thought of another reason to invite Gloria. The Wizard Tower of the Witch Council. Although it was managed by Gloria, it was not her personal property after all. The two of them stepped into the teleportation array. Sure enough, as Soren expected, the wizard towers in the north were connected together, and they were basically connected by portals. When Soren came over, many members of the Northern Witch Council had gathered here. All of them were beautiful women, and it was difficult to judge their age from their appearance. Although there were high-grade male wizards in the Northern Witch Council, all the ones who were eligible to enter the council were women. The status of high-grade male wizards was similar to that of guests, but they could not reach the core of power. In the face of Soren's arrival, the other northern witches were curious, but there was no hostility. Many of them smiled and nodded at him and Gloria, and the witches greeted each other with a slight nod. The atmosphere was quite harmonious, and there was no sense of open strife or veiled strife like in other organizations. This meant that under the management of the Eye of the North, the members of the Northern Witch Council were quite united. This unity would immediately transform into a strong fighting force once they encountered other places. Therefore, when Soren saw the Eye of the North being looked at with respect by many witches, his evaluation of her in his heart could not help but improve a lot. She was worthy of being a veteran legendary witch who had stood for hundreds of years. Not only was she powerful, but she was also first class in the way she controlled the council. This kind of wisdom was worthy of respect, but Soren preferred the feeling of being in awe rather than respect. So he could never be loved and respected by others like the Eye of the North, but he liked to be worshipped and respected by his subordinates. It was hard to say which was better, but it was much more difficult to win respect than to win awe. Soren still liked simple and crude things. Sit down. The Eye of the North looked slightly old. In fact, it was inevitable that she would grow old at her age. She looked at the other witches with her white pupils, and then tapped the ground with her staff. When her eyes fell on Soren, the Eye of the North paused for a moment and then said, "Be quiet. I know what you all want to know in your hearts. I'll tell you what happened now and let you know why the Githyanki's attacked us." A silver-white brilliance emerged. A blade fragment about the size of a dagger appeared out of thin air in the palm of the Eye of the North. When the silver-white blade fragment appeared, everyone present felt a force in their hearts. Then they couldn't help showing a trace of surprise. They looked at each other and communicated secretly. Everything was inseparable from the word artifact. Soren and Gloria looked at each other. Although neither of them spoke, they could guess the meaning in each other's eyes. That was, everything was for the artifact. The artifact had incredible power. Although there were many artifacts in history, it was quite rare for them to fall into the hands of mortals. Looking at the equipment on Soren's body, it was clear that although he had fought for so long, the limit of his contact was only legendary items. The artifact was out of his reach and at the same time, it was also quite fatal. Because the artifact could be located by magic. In front of them was an artifact or a fragment of a powerful artifact. Even if it was just a fragment, they could feel the power contained in it. And Soren also felt a strange aura. It seemed to come from an evil god. Among the people present, he was the only one who had this feeling because the others were surprised. Only Soren couldn't help but frown. His expression was a little uneasy, a little disgusted, and a little repulsed. The artifact was naturally inextricably related to the gods, but the silver sword of Githyansk didn't seem to be related to many gods. In Soren's memory, it seemed to have more interactions with some evil gods. They're here for this. The Eye of the North looked at the others present, then raised her hand and cast an isolation light. She said to the others, "About 150 years ago, this thing fell into our hands, so I've been keeping it since then. There are still some fragments like this scattered in many places, but the two largest ones are kept by us in the Wizard City. For so many years, we've been secretly studying its secrets." The silver sword of Githyansk was forged in a very ancient era. The kingdom of soul suckers was another era of arcane prosperity that was not inferior to the Silver Age. So we've been trying to study some secrets from it, and the special divine power it contains. Unfortunately, our research progress is very slow, and some of the ancient knowledge has been lost. For more than 100 years, We've only completed 1.5 research projects. The Eye of the North made a gesture behind her. Then they saw 2 witches with the same old face come out. They glanced at the other witches who were obviously much younger and took out 2 pieces of special silver-white metal. The members of the Witch Council were elected once every 50 years. If they couldn't advance to the legendary level, they could only retire behind the scenes. The legendary witches could continue to be re-elected. The Eye of the North raised her hand and touched the silver-white metal, then slowly said, "This is the first project we cracked, the secret of the silver sword of Githyansk. The silver metal can change shape and has a special memory ability. What you see with the naked eye is a silver flowing liquid, but in fact, its real side is a kind of powerful memory metal that can repair itself." Legend. The high-level golems of the Arcane Empire could repair themselves. No matter how serious the damage was, they could not be completely destroyed. And they could change their shape on their own. Many great arcanists could transform them into a kind of weapon called advanced magic armor to protect themselves. We have always thought that the material of advanced magic armor has an inseparable relationship with these astral metals. The Eye of the North raised her hand and waved on the silver-white metal. Then they saw a faint aura emerge, and the silver-white metal changed its shape automatically. First, it turned into the shape of a silver sword of Githyansk, then it turned into a beheading sword, then it turned into a pair of gloves, and finally it even structured into a toy model of about 20 centimeters high that was similar to the appearance of a steel golem. Such a change gave a strong impact to many of the witches present, and they could not help but be stunned one by one. Even Soren was a little stunned. So high-end. In the past he also came into contact with the relics left by the Arcane Empire, but it was the first time he saw such a high-end thing. Although we have cracked some of the secrets. The Eye of the North glanced at the others, closed her eyes and thought for a moment, then continued, for example its ability to change shape, the recovery ability of the memory metal, and the fusion of elemental energy etc. But we have no way to use it in other places. At most, we can only imitate the silver sword of Githyansk, which is undoubtedly not of much use to us. We lack the most core part of the knowledge. So this topic has entered a dead zone 30 years ago and has been sealed in the cutting-edge laboratory of the Witch Council. There was a short silence. The Eye of the North glanced at Soren and continued, as for the other half of the topic, it belongs to the study of divine power. The silver sword of Githyansk once killed 3 evil gods, 2 of which were true gods with divinity, and 1 of which was a slightly weaker demigod. So this artifact fragment has always had residual divine power, and we tried to use it to crack some of the secrets. There are many secrets in this topic that can't be told to you. When you reach the realm of legends you can come to me to learn new knowledge. From today onwards, if any of you are interested in the research of the first topic, I will also open your access to this topic in the library. If there is no problem, everyone else can leave. Gloria. And your friends stay. I have something to say to you. P.S. Today's update. There are 2 more. My novel Lord of the Abyss will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform, and there will be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the upper right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow it. Hurry up. Chapter 327. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, search for the official WeChat account Dread, and follow it. Give more support to Lord of the Abyss. The northern witches carefully left the room one by one. Before leaving they couldn't help but curiously look at Soren, and their eyes seemed to be very interested. Someone who could make Her Excellency the Eye of the North ask to stay should not be an ordinary person. Faced with the gaze of so many senior witches, even Soren felt a little pressure. After all, they were almost equivalent to more than 80% of the top fighting force in the north. Any one of these women had the strength, identity, and status of a city lord. Sit down. The Eye of the North glanced at Gloria, and then her eyes fell on Soren. She slowly said, "Thank you for your help this time. The Witch Council is merciless to their enemies, but they are never stingy to their friends. If you hadn't killed the Red Dragon, I'm afraid we wouldn't have won the battle so easily. So I'm going to give you a reward in return for your help." A faint light of magic appeared. A shadow similar to a treasure trove appeared in the palm of the Eye of the North, and at the same time, 3 items appeared. She looked at Soren in front of her and slowly said, "Choose one of them. Or you can choose this Red Dragon's soul." When you killed it, I had a soul-trapping crystal with me that automatically imprisoned part of its soul. To some extent, it also has a strong power, but your spellcasting ability is too low. I'm afraid you can't use its power. A dark red crystal appeared. This was an extremely rare crystal that could only be found at the edge of the Bator Inferno. It was a legendary item, and its effect was to automatically cast a spell similar to soul trapping on some powerful enemies after killing them. It could imprison the enemy's complete soul or part of it. This kind of crystal rarely appeared in the material plane. Since the Eye of the North had such a crystal, Soren was basically sure that she had been to the Bator Inferno. Red Dragon Soul? Soren glanced at the dark red crystal, but he didn't show much interest in it. The power of the soul was very strong. However, the soul binding technique could only bind a part of it, and it required a special ability to mobilize it. Otherwise, this kind of crystal could only be considered a top-grade soul stone, which could be used to trade souls with devils. Soren did not have the ability to touch the soul realm yet, so he could only absorb the red dragon's soul and convert it into slaughter EXP. It might be tens of thousands of slaughter EXP, but he had other ways to accumulate slaughter EXP. There was no need to waste such a precious opportunity. So he looked at the other rewards that the Eye of the North had shown him. 3 pieces of legendary equipment. Unfortunately, Soren could only choose one of them. The first legendary equipment was a cape. The Eye of the North didn't seem to have any intention of explaining the uses of the equipment to Soren. He simply let him choose one from the pile. This was a test of one's eyesight. Soren couldn't tell what the first item was, but he was sure that it was a legendary item. It should be between Legendary Tier 1 and Legendary Tier 2. The second item was a ring. There were lifelike dragon patterns engraved on it, and it didn't seem to be an ordinary gem. It looked more like the eyeball of some creature. There was a strong magic aura on it, so it should be a powerful legendary accessory. Soren couldn't see the real thing, so he couldn't use Slaughter EXP to identify it. He could only look at the third item. Suddenly, Soren's whole body shook. He turned his head and looked at the Eye of the North in front of him. He bowed slightly and said, "Your Excellency, I choose the last item. The boots should be what I need the most." The Eye of the North smiled and nodded. She slowly said, "You have good taste. It seems that you are an experienced rogue. And you have good knowledge." She turned to Gloria and ordered, "Gloria, go and take out the Boots of Wind. I have temporarily unlocked the authority of the treasury." Gloria glanced at Soren, then bowed and left. Soren seemed to be thinking about something. The Eye of the North asked Gloria to get something, obviously to send her away. Could it be that she had something to say to him alone? Gloria walked out of the room. The Eye of the North stared deeply at Soren. An invisible pressure made Soren's whole body tense, but he didn't feel any obvious hostility. After a while, the pressure subsided, and the Eye of the North's white pupil emitted a faint light. She sighed and said, "I can see people outside of fate. Maybe this is why Gloria chose you." People outside of fate? Soren couldn't help but be stunned. It seemed that he still didn't know how to react. The Eye of the North stared at his expression and said slowly, "You should have heard the story about the goddess of fate flipping a coin. You are the kind of person who will make the coin stand up when it hits the ground." So that's what she meant. Soren showed a thoughtful expression, but he didn't know what to say. He didn't know prophecy magic and he didn't know anything about fate. Soren couldn't see what the Eye of the North could see. "I met someone like you when I was young." The Eye of the North seemed to remember something, and her expression became gentle. She said slowly, "There are only 1 or 2 people like you every 100 years, and all of you are restless. It seems that anything related to you will eventually deviate from the original path. It can be a good thing, a ray of hope, but it can also be a terrible thing, a fire of destruction." The old woman in front of him seemed to be lost in her memories. Her white pupil looked at the sky and she seemed to be reminiscing. She whispered, "Unfortunately, he still chose a path that deviated from our path. Young man, I don't know what you will choose in the end. But I already feel that something terrible is about to happen. The stars that represent the gods are dim and this is definitely not a good thing. Young man, people like you have a lot of freedom in their fate, even more so than the gods. I hope you can make a good choice." The Eye of the North sighed as if she had met someone who would make the coin of fate stand up. She slowly sat down and she didn't want to say anything else. She just fell into deep thought. Since her life was so long, she naturally had a lot of memories. Wizards who could become legendary were rarely impractical. Most of them had experienced many battles, and their footprints were even involved in many planes. Light footsteps were heard. Gloria's figure quickly came in from outside. She was holding a pair of exquisite leather boots with special runes on them. This was the reward that Soren had chosen. It was a legendary level 2 equipment, and it was also a very famous legendary equipment. Item type: Boots of Gale, +2, item grade: Legendary, grade 2. Item description: This is a pair of boots with legendary stories. They appeared in many stories because they were the pride of many legendary professions. In fact, there were many such legendary boots, but their number was getting fewer and fewer. But no matter what, it was a dream item for many professions, whether it was for battle or escape. Requirements: none. Equipment effect: permanent, haste. Equipment special effect: haste. This equipment has the effect of haste. Anyone who wears it will automatically receive the haste spell buff. Their movement speed will be greatly increased, and at the same time, their attack speed will be increased by a little. This spell effect cannot be removed by Dispel Magic, unless someone destroys this equipment, such as Disintegrate, Mordenkainen's Disintegrate, and so on. A legendary equipment. A legendary equipment that wasn't very high grade but was quite useful. Permanent, haste. It was called Boots of Haste by adventurers. It was a piece of equipment that could only be found by chance, and it was also a necessary item for a top rogue. Eye of the North seemed a little tired. After she handed the equipment to Soren, she waved her hand and motioned them to leave. When Soren and Gloria bowed slightly and left, she looked at Soren in front of her, then smiled at Gloria and said, "He's not bad." The Eye of the North closed her eyes as if she wanted to be alone. My novel Abyss Ruler will have more new content on the official WeChat platform, and there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow. Hurry up. Chapter 328. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, search for the WeChat public account Dread, and follow it to give more support to Lord of the Abyss. He's not bad. This sentence seemed to have another layer of meaning. But there was no doubt that this represented the Eye of the North's affirmation of Soren. Although Soren was relatively silent from the beginning to the end and almost didn't say much. But at that time he was able to follow Gloria to the astral plane without hesitation, which had already proved a lot of things. Some things were not said but done. As a legendary who had experienced countless storms, the Eye of the North had seen many men who were good at flattery, but she appreciated the kind of men who proved themselves with their actions the most. No matter how much they said, they couldn't compare to what they did for her. Perhaps stupid women would be easily blinded by words, but women like her would see more. So when Gloria heard this, a slight blush appeared on her face, and then she turned her head and glanced at Soren. At first, she actually had a vague impression of Soren. He was just an interesting rogue and a brother who loved his sister. Since she met Soren in Amber City, she didn't pay much attention to this man. She just felt that he was a little special. Compared to other rogues, he obviously knew more. What really attracted her attention was Vivian. That little girl was the key to her attention. But, as time passed little by little, Soren attracted her more and more things. She didn't expect a rogue to have such rich knowledge, and she didn't expect him to grow so quickly. Soren's speed of improvement was completely beyond her expectations, which made her very interested and secretly observed him. On the other hand, she envied the relationship between Soren and Vivian. As a northern witch, she rarely experienced family affection, so Vivian awakened her deep maternal instinct to some extent. In fact, before meeting the believers of the god of hunting, Soren was just an interesting person to her. As a noble northern witch, it was impossible for her to fall in love with a man so easily. But all this changed when they encountered the believers of the god of hunting. Under such circumstances, Soren did not hesitate to choose to fight for a chance of survival for them, even if it was possible for him to die in the hands of the hunters. Death. People were very tense when facing death, and it was easy for them to affect others at this time. At that moment, Gloria saw the courage to face death in Soren's eyes. At that moment, Soren gave her a completely different impression. The figure of this man grew taller and taller, and finally stopped at the scene where he was drenched in blood as he rushed towards the hunters. He faced death directly in order to let them leave safely. Although it was more for the sake of the cute little girl, Gloria, as one of them, would remember everything in her heart. She would remember the courage and protection of that moment. Time passed just like that. Gloria remembered this man. She even thought of him and worried about his safety. For this reason, she didn't hesitate to use the divination spell that she had to pay a price for. Some emotions seemed to be brewing. Although they spent less time together since they reunited, and he seemed to have been busy for Vivian, Gloria had deeply remembered this man and even felt happy to see him again. Sometimes she even thought that if he was half as good to her as he was to Vivian, then it might be good to marry him. After all, as a noble and powerful northern witch, there were not many men she could choose. Ordinary people were not worthy of her at all, and there were only a few legendary figures whose strength and status were similar to hers. She didn't want to be like her mother and find a random man to have children with. Although Gloria knew that her father was also a powerful wizard, in fact she rarely saw him because her mother only wanted to have better offspring with him. Sometimes wizards were so rational and cold. As a northern witch, Gloria knew that she must not be impulsive, because spellcasters needed to be calm and precise. But when facing this man, she always seemed to have an impulse in her heart. So, when she saw Soren again, she subconsciously dressed up a little. If nothing else happened, some emotions should continue to be transitioned. They might accumulate at a certain moment, or they might return to calmness over time. But a little accident happened. When the attack of the Githyanki spread to the material plane, and Soren did not hesitate to choose to go to the astral world with her, the accumulated emotions in Gloria's heart broke out. Although she didn't seem to have changed much on the surface, no one knew that her heart was trembling. Because this time he didn't do it for Vivian but for himself. Inside the wizard tower. After Soren came back, he was arranged to a big room by Gloria. A cross-plane battle not only tired his body, but also Soren's high-strung nerves. So when he returned to the room, he was ready to take a little rest. But to his surprise, this big room seemed to be decorated a little too well. It looked like Gloria's boudoir. The floor was covered with a soft velvet carpet, and the walls were covered with exquisite relief paintings. There was a dressing table near the window on the opposite side, which looked like some kind of expensive purple wood. The whole room was filled with a faint fragrance, which was exactly the same as Gloria's. The soft bed was enough for 10 people to lie on. Soren remembered that Vivian seemed to have mentioned that Gloria's bed was very big because she liked to sleep like this. The discovery in front of him made Soren's heart beat faster, and at the same time, he felt that his mouth was dry. His whole body was hot, his skin was slightly red, and even his breathing seemed to have become a little faster. Click. Soren gently opened the wardrobe. Sure enough, there were soft and tight female pajamas, and there was a witch's robe next to it. In the corner of the wardrobe there was a female belt. There was no doubt that this was Gloria's room, because everything Soren saw told him that Gloria usually slept in this room. Heavy footsteps sounded. Soren took a step back and closed the wardrobe. When he came to the door, the steel golem's dull voice sounded from outside. "Your Excellency. Master asked me to take you to a bath. Please come with me." Hearing the voice outside the door, Soren suddenly felt that his body was sticky. Just now his whole body was hot and it seemed that he had sweated a lot. He didn't know if it was because of the side effect of the dragon blood baptism, or some other reason. Soren felt that his current condition was not quite right. According to Chinese medicine, it should be hyperactive. Maybe it was really because of the dragon blood baptism. Too much was as bad as too little. 30% of the medicinal properties would become toxic. My novel Lord of the Abyss will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform, and there's also a 100% chance of a lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow. Hurry up. Chapter 329. Soren followed the iron golem to a room on the other floor of the wizard tower. This room had a special doorknob and it seemed to be a private place. It seemed to have been set up with a magic barrier. The iron golem didn't enter the room. Instead, it took out something that looked like a ruby crystal from its palm, and gently tapped on the rune on the door. A faint red light appeared, and the sound of a magic lock being opened came from behind the door. Then, everything inside appeared in front of Soren. It was a spacious bathroom, but it was definitely not a simple bathroom. Soren smelled a very special fragrance as soon as he entered. It smelled a little like Gloria's fragrance, but it was more like sandalwood. Soren walked in and saw a lit incense burner. It was an incense burner with a carved base inlaid with agate jade, and runes engraved with golden threads. The simple magic circle allowed the incense from the east to burn slowly, and at the same time, spread the calming scent throughout the room. There was a bed on the opposite side of the room. There was something that looked like a square cushion on top of it, and there were many books beside it. There were also some delicate objects that Soren didn't quite understand. There was another door on the side. He could hear the faint sound of running water. Soren walked in and immediately saw a large bathtub. However, this wasn't the most important part. The most eye-catching thing was that there was a large magic circle under the bathtub. Soren couldn't identify this magic circle with his knowledge, but he could feel the elemental aura it contained. This bathtub was definitely not simple. The room in front of him should be Gloria's secret meditation room, because there were many tools that could help wizards enter the state of meditation. What? Soren reached his hand into the bathtub and immediately felt a surge of energy. It was the gathering of elemental energy, and it wasn't very explosive. On the contrary, it was very gentle. Elemental pool? Soren closed his eyes and tried to sense it. Unfortunately, his perception was too low, and it was difficult for him to find anything without extraordinary perception. However, Soren's experience told him that this pool was somehow connected to the elemental pool, which was the core of the wizard tower. It also reminded Soren of the pool of blue water in the sea temple. Almost every time he was cast on, he would wake up naked in that blue water. That was something similar to the elemental pool in the sea temple. Even the sea temple's holy water was continuously produced from it. However, Soren seemed to have bathed in it twice. Hopefully, the people who drank the holy water later on wouldn't mind this. Soren wasn't worried that Gloria would harm him, so he took off his clothes and entered the pool naked. A cool and refreshing aura seeped into his body. Soren heaved a sigh of relief as if all his tiredness had been washed away. The power of the water element. Soren could feel that the water element in the pool had become much more active, and a faint magic aura appeared on the side wall of the pool, as if a special magic circle had been activated. This cool aura lasted for about 15 minutes, and then it began to turn into another more agile force, which seeped into his body little by little along the pool water. The power of the wind element. Soren closed his eyes and felt the operation of the elemental pool. A special energy emerged and then gradually seeped into his body. Water, fire, earth, and air. The power of the four elements emerged one by one. When Soren experienced the whole process, nearly an hour had passed. Then a data prompt appeared. You've received a special energy buff. You've experienced the basic baptism of the elemental pool. You've automatically mastered the ability, minor magic resistance. Your body has acquired the characteristics of a minor magic creature. Minor magic resistance, gifted ability. For some reason, your body has acquired the characteristics of a magic creature, which increases your magic resistance. When facing any magic, you'll gain an additional resistance bonus of 1. This resistance bonus can be used on the magic immunity test, and it can also be converted into a damage reduction effect when receiving a magic attack. This ability cannot be improved through conventional means. As your magic resistance increases, you'll gain a stronger resistance bonus. Soren stood up in surprise. He looked at his newly acquired ability and couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. Magic resistance. This was one of the most difficult talents to obtain. Unlike the resistance to cold, fire, poison, and so on, magic resistance was difficult to obtain through conventional means. Moreover, the ability to resist magic could increase the immunity, and when accumulated to a certain extent, it could directly immunize some low-level magic. Soren had seen legendary equipment that increased magic resistance before, but it was the first time he saw a way to directly increase a talent. It seemed that Gloria had just activated something extraordinary for him. Magic creature. In other words, it referred to a real supernatural creature. The legendary monk's divine transcendence allowed him to be completely immune to any non-rare weapon attack, which meant that he had completely transformed into a magic creature. At the level of a legendary monk, he was basically completely out of the range of mortals. It seemed that the energy had been exhausted. The magic aura in the whole pool gradually dissipated. Soren stood up and took a look, then changed his clothes and walked out. Legendary wizards had mastered some methods to transform their bodies. The simplest method was to pay a price and use the wish spell to increase one's attributes, then use various kinds of energy to strengthen one's body. Living body strengthening was a very high-end part. Basically, only wizards in the Arcane Empire could do it. Currently, the experts in body strengthening were the liches. Ordinary liches could increase their physical and magic resistance to nearly 50%. If it was a demigod lich, then their resistance would be even stronger. After all, they were already dead creatures. Even if their bodies were destroyed, it didn't matter. At most, they could just create a new body. In contrast, the other wizards obviously didn't have it so easy. It seemed that Gloria had also studied the arcane empire. Soren walked out of the pool and then walked towards the room where he first started. Beside the corridor there were many unactivated steel golems. Under normal circumstances, they were in a state of hibernation. They would only be activated when there was an emergency because the energy pool of the wizard tower couldn't keep them running for a long time. The knowledge that all wizards dreamed of was the secrets of energy during the arcane empire. It was enough to keep the floating city running, and it was the key for the arcanists to fight against the gods. Even a half-baked wizard like Soren knew that energy was the key to high-end combat power. Back in the room. When Soren opened the door, he paused for a moment, then walked towards the big bed as if nothing had happened. There was one more person in the room. Gloria was wearing snow-white pajamas. At the moment, she was reading a book with a soft pillow behind her back. Her white and slender thighs were crossed together. Through the gaps of her pajamas, one could see her white jade-like skin. Her toes were round and smooth. In this era there were very few women like her. Even her toes were like pearls. This required a very superior princess-like living environment. The Northern Witch was very calm about Soren's arrival. At least she looked very calm because she was steadily turning the pages of the book with her fingers. She didn't even look up at Soren. The pajamas were tied with a white belt, so there wasn't much scenery. However, one could see her full breasts stretching out the collar. As a tall northern woman, Gloria's breasts and buttocks were much fuller than other women. She also seemed to have just taken a bath. There was a very refreshing fragrance on her body, and her silky long hair casually draped over her shoulders. Soren naturally sat on the big bed. After taking a bath, he changed into a set of loose clothes. After sitting on the bed, he directly lay on his side next to Gloria. He reached out and took a big soft pillow and put it on his back as well. Gloria naturally knew that Soren was leaning over, but she was still reading a book and seemed to be very serious. Only her breathing was a little hurried when Soren leaned over. Soren looked at the woman in front of him who was fatally attractive and seductive. He couldn't help but smile playfully. He didn't say anything. He just leaned close to Gloria and pretended to read something on the book. In fact, it was very profound magic knowledge. Soren was just a half-baked wizard, so he couldn't understand it. However, it didn't matter if he couldn't understand it. Soren's goal was to deliberately move closer to the woman in front of him so that she could feel his breath. His hot breath blew on her ear, and her delicate skin seemed to have tiny goosebumps. This process only lasted for a minute or two. After reading for a while, Soren seemed to feel dizzy, so he pretended to stretch his body. Then he raised his arm and naturally put it through Gloria's back. The woman beside him trembled slightly, but she didn't reject him. Then Soren's arm went from her back to Gloria's slender waist. This posture made her lean towards Soren's shoulder. She didn't say anything. She turned her head and glanced at Soren playfully. Then she returned her gaze to the book. Gloria's expression was still calm, but her cheeks were a little red. "It's nothing." Soren opened his mouth. His voice sounded a little drowsy. He closed his eyes and said, "Continue reading your book. It's more comfortable to hug like this." His warm palm pressed against her belly button. Soren closed his eyes as if he was sleeping, but his fingertips were gently moving across Gloria's smooth belly. He could feel her body trembling slightly, so the playful smile on his face became more and more obvious. At the same time, he inadvertently drew a circle around her belly button. Phew. Gloria's breathing quickened, but her expression was still calm. She didn't even look at Soren. Her eyes were still on the thick book, but she seemed to be a little absent-minded. His fingertips moved up little by little. It wasn't a sudden attack. Soren's finger moved along her belly button. He could feel her skin tighten slightly. Gloria could clearly feel his fingertips approaching her chest, so the moment they were about to touch, she couldn't help but take a deep breath. Then Soren stretched out his hand and grabbed a soft, supple lump. The silky texture was warm and smooth like jade. He loved it so much that he couldn't put it down. He suddenly remembered that he hadn't been so close to a woman for a long time. He held it with his hand and squeezed it. Soren knew that this wasn't a very comfortable technique for women, so he gently pinched a bit of red. His index finger and thumb moved slightly, and his pinky finger moved across the plump and delicate edge. There was a slight tremor. Soren's fingers left afterimages in a small area. In the next moment, Gloria's breathing was completely disrupted. Her delicate body that was half leaning in Soren's arms tensed up, as if she had been electrocuted. The pages of her book fell apart. Soren's eyes were still closed. His action made Gloria relax a little because it was easy to feel nervous when being stared at like this. So when Soren's fingers stopped, she quickly adjusted her breathing and flipped the book back to its original page. Then she couldn't help but cross her legs and change her posture. It was a subconscious action, but it made Soren's smile even more strange. Come closer. Soren opened his eyes slightly. His hand was still holding the left breast. He casually said, "It's more convenient this way." With a little force, Gloria's delicate body leaned over and completely leaned into his arms. What was more convenient? In fact, both of them knew what was going to happen next. But this kind of thing couldn't be rushed, especially since it was their first time. Maybe if Soren used a simple and rough method, Gloria, who had completely accepted him in her heart, wouldn't resist. But Soren wouldn't do such a thing. From the beginning, Soren had the upper hand. It was as if he was progressing step by step. He was also observing, pleasing, and playing with her. His palms changed the plump and fair skin into various shapes. This process lasted for 3 minutes. Soren wasn't in a hurry to do anything. He was just controlling Gloria's body. At the beginning she was nervous and trembling, but she slowly got used to his touch. This was the first time she was so close to a man. Soren could feel it from her body. When Gloria's body started to get used to Soren's touch, he began to move on to the next part. His fingers gently slid down along her flat stomach. Bit by bit they went deeper and deeper. The loose straps of her pajamas had already been loosened. Half of Gloria's clothes were faintly discernible. She couldn't read at all. When she felt his fingers getting closer and closer to a certain spot, she subconsciously clamped her slender legs together. Then she pressed the heavy book against Soren's palm. She was nervous. She had just relaxed, but now she was nervous again. Her skin couldn't help but tighten. It was at this moment. Soren opened his eyes. Then he suddenly reached out and pulled her into his arms. He threw the book down and leaned over to kiss Gloria's lips. Compared to the initial gentleness, Soren's kiss was a little rough. It was almost suffocating. Gloria's response was clumsy and slow. In fact, she could only hug Soren's neck and passively let him invade her. His hot breath and powerful aura didn't give her any room to resist. The kiss didn't stop. After the initial intense invasion, it gradually turned into gentle nibbling and licking. The tip of their tongues touched and intertwined. His breath was so close. Perhaps it wasn't as thrilling as an electric shock, but it made Gloria feel like she was in perfect harmony with him. Kissing was always the closest form of expression. It was even closer to each other's hearts than the last step. Then she started to feel a finger sliding down. But this time, she didn't reject it. She wasn't even that nervous anymore. Maybe it was because she was a little out of breath. The skin that his fingers touched was as smooth and delicate as always. This made Soren a little surprised. Because he had already touched a place that was as oily and moist as honey, but he didn't touch any hair. Gloria clamped her legs together the moment he touched her, almost trapping Soren's hand between them. But it didn't matter. Soren's fingertips were wet and moist. Then he ran his fingers along the delicate skin. He could feel Gloria suddenly tremble. She seemed to want to moan, but because he was kissing her lips, she could only make a faint nasal sound. Sauron appeared to be very gentle. His fingers moved at a small distance and occasionally trembled at an astonishing frequency. Gloria's whole body tensed up. In fact, from the moment Soren started, she was already in a state of pleasure that she had never felt before. Omnipotent hands. There were probably not many people in the world who had more dexterous fingers than Soren. She finally let out an uncontrollable moan. Gloria leaned on his chest and panted. Her beautiful face was already bright red. Her white forehead was covered with fine beads of sweat. Her 5 fingers were clenched, her legs were trembling, her feet were arched, and even her calves were trembling a little. She had just experienced a feeling that she had never experienced before. This feeling was quite unfamiliar to her, but it was still intoxicating. It's just beginning. Soren withdrew his slippery fingers and smiled playfully. It seems like you're ready. There were no extra movements. A beautiful fusion of soul and flesh was unfolding. It was still early. She still had enough time to enjoy and experience this new and intoxicating feeling. P.S. 5,000 words chapter. I wrote for a whole day. I wanted to write a warm feeling. I don't know if I succeeded. P.S. Some parts of the plot need to be modified. Unable to fill in the word count. Can only paste some information. Sorry. Level 1 Magic Armor Blind Burning Hand Charm Human Ice Palm Colorful Ball Colorful Spray Find Magic Pet Friendly Grease Identification Night Vision Larok Energy Absorption Magic Missile Protection Evil Protection Petrification Shadow Shield Lightning Claw Hypnosis Intimidation Level 2 Agana Spitfire Haze Deafness Detect Evil Detect Invisibility Ghoul Touch Glittering Powder Fear Invisibility Percussion Clear Alignment Luck Melf Acid Arrow Mirror Shadow Law Command Lethargy Weakness Light Resistance Fear Stinking Cloud Strength Sound Spider Web Level 3 Clairvoyance Detect Illusion Berserk Charm Dispel Magic Fireball Fire Arrow Spirit Armor Haste Immobilization Undead Immobilization 10 feet Invisibility Lightning Mayo Minor Meteor Small Spell Deflection Level 1 Summon Monster Undetectable Protection from Cold Damage Protection from Fire Damage Protection from Ranged Weapon Removal Spell Skeleton Trap Slow Spell Penetration Vampires Touch Level 4 Confusion Infection Farsight Emotional Helplessness Enchanted Weapon Poison Curse Fire Shield Blue Fire Shield Red Small Spell Nullification Barrier Ice Storm Advanced Invisibility Odalook Elastic Barrier Small Sequencing Level 2 Summon Monster Removal Curse Transform Others Transform Self Soul Armor Secret Word Spider Breeding Mage Ice Stone Skin Teleport Level 5 Corpse Manipulation Dispel Confusion Death Cloud Icicle Summon Secondary Wind Elemental Summon Secondary Earth Elemental Summon Secondary Fire Elemental Control Stun Immobilization Reduce Resistance Small Spell Reversal Level 3 Summon Monster Oracle Phantom Blade Protection Acid Damage Protection Electric Damage Protection Normal Weapon Protection Shadow Door Spell Nullification Spell Shield Sunfire Level 6 Summon Scavenger Chain Lightning Summon Wind Elemental Summon Fire Elemental Summon Earth Elemental Accident Death Fog Death Disintegration Petrification Spell Nullification Barrier Advanced Haste Invisibility Spirit Mislead See-Through Magic Law Order Silence Magic Energy Damage Protection Magic Weapon Spell Deflection Dispel Petrification Summon Neon Mist Tansen Polymorph True Sight Summon Pterosaur Level 7. From here on out, it's a high-level battle. Summon Undead Creature Manipulation Delay Explosive Fireball Finger of Death Kelvin Whip of Protection Limited Wish Golden Bell Shield Mass Invisibility Duncan Sword Order Awe Prismatic Jet Projection Protect Elemental Damage Ruby Reversal Ray Spell Sequencing Confusion Barrier Summon Wind Jin Summon Fire Jin Summon Harkshaw Spell Reversal Level 8 Arbidaki Withering Spell Super Golden Bell Shield Burning Cloud Labyrinth See-Through Shield Order Blind Mimicry Spell Activate Summon Demon Death Seal Fear Seal Shock Seal Protect Energy Damage Level 9 Ultimate Golden Bell Shield Annihilation Demon Sword Chain Mishap Energy Drain Freedom Gate Between Worlds Imprisonment Meteor Burst Order Death Transformation Alien Spell Trap Spell Heavy Strike Time Stop Banshee Howl Chapter 330. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, please search for Kdred on WeChat and follow it. Give more support to Lord of the Abyss. The morning sun shone down. Soren slowly woke up from his deep sleep. Maybe it was because he got a lot of satisfaction last night, or maybe it was because he hadn't had such a good rest in a long time. So he slept until almost noon before he woke up. The tip of his nose was still surrounded by a faint fragrance, and his fingertips seemed to still have the soft and delicate touch of last night. However, Gloria's figure was no longer here, and even the traces of last night's madness had been cleaned up. For a high-grade northern witch, this was no more than a matter of lifting a finger. A set of new clothes was neatly stacked on the cabinet next to the bed. It was not the adventurer's outfit that Soren was used to, but the kind of simple, loose and comfortable clothes. The style seemed to be something that the northern nobles liked because the northern nobles' men and women's clothes were a little bit tight. Soren stood up naked, stretched his muscles a little, and then put on the rather casual clothes. At this time, he realized that he had been so tense in the past that he had never prepared clothes for himself except for the adventurer's outfit, combat outfit. Yes, all of Soren's clothes were designed for combat, and he would never consider this kind of clothes that were a little tight. Basically, all the clothes he prepared were like the kind of training clothes that could be opened and closed, but in fact, the clothes that people usually wear are a little similar to the clothes that we are wearing now. There is a danger that a roundhouse kick will turn into an open pants. If it was in the past, Soren would probably not wear such clothes, because he had to be ready for battle at any time. However, this was obviously prepared for him by Gloria, so he still put it on. Besides, this was Gloria's wizard tower. There was a sound in the room. Immediately, there was a dull sound of footsteps, and a clay golem came in with a breakfast box. It bowed slightly and said, "Your Excellency, this is what the master prepared for you. She is now in the lab and the master said that you can go to her when you wake up." The clay golem consumed less energy. They were low-level golems that were always in the wizard tower. Basically, they were in a state of operation all day long. Usually, these golems were also responsible for cleaning the wizard tower. Many of them were injected with a higher level of intelligence. After receiving Soren's nod, the clay golem carried the breakfast box over like a servant and placed it firmly on the table. It weighed about 600 pounds and was much taller than an adult. It was suitable for a lot of heavy work. Breakfast was simple. Since this was the wizard tower, the food was very similar to the wizard style. Most wizards liked to drink morning tea. The tea bricks from the east were ground and finally made into something similar to milk tea. Soren didn't really like the taste, but he didn't reject it either. He ate a few pieces of bacon, a large piece of white bread, and finally drank the milk tea. In terms of food, other than the halflings, there is no other race in the world that can compete with the foodies of my great China. Soren quickly went to the lab. Gloria seemed to have released his authority in the wizard tower, because Soren could actually give simple orders to the puppet golems, such as leading the way and opening a room. In fact, the women who had power in this world were very strong. Soren never expected the other party to become obedient because of their closer relationship. He was a man who rose from the Underdark. In the Underdark, the drows could cut a man who had just been glued to each other into pieces of meat in the blink of an eye for their own interests. It was conceivable that a man who had stayed in the Underdark would not be too naive about the thoughts of any woman. When Soren came in, Gloria already knew. However, she didn't turn around to look at him. Instead, she focused on a small piece of silver-white metal in front of her. Gloria was wearing a pair of special black-rimmed gold-rimmed glasses. At this moment, the crystal lenses were faintly glowing. There were many tightly packed instrument parts around her, and there were also test tubes filled with an unknown liquid. At this moment, she was no longer as gentle and charming as she was last night. This was because she was wearing a thick wizard robe with many dense defensive runes. In case of any accident, the spells on the robe would collectively trigger and protect her from all kinds of unexpected situations. No experiment conducted by an adept was absolutely safe. It could be said that alchemy skills were improved little by little in an explosion. If a wizard didn't pay attention to protecting himself, he could easily die in his own experiments. You're awake. When Soren's footsteps approached, Gloria gently moved her finger and used the wizard's hand to put down the silver-white metal. Then she slowly took off her black-rimmed glasses and turned to look at Soren with a gentle smile. You slept like a child last night. When I woke up, I saw that you were sleeping very soundly, so I didn't wake you up. Soren looked at the beautiful woman in front of him. Even though she was wearing a thick wizard robe, it still couldn't cover her exquisite body. He stretched out his arms and hugged Gloria in front of him. She didn't dodge at all. Instead, she very docilely leaned into his arms like a kitten and changed into a more comfortable position. A warm hug. Soren could smell the fragrance of her hair from the tip of his nose. His always sharp eyes seemed to have softened a lot at this moment. He slowly said, "Yes. I slept very soundly last night. But I didn't think that you would be able to recover so quickly after that." Hearing this, Gloria's charming face blushed. She lightly punched him and raised her head. She didn't want to admit defeat and said, "It's just that I'm not used to it for the first time. Don't forget that I'm a high-grade witch. A well-prepared spellcaster can face any situation calmly." Soren heard this and said, "Like the grease spell?" Gloria's face instantly turned red. She turned her back to him as if something was poked in her heart. As expected, Soren's face showed a trace of understanding. No wonder it felt so smooth last night. He thought that Gloria's body was special and had a higher flow rate. It turned out that she had secretly used some special grease spell. Spellcasters are really omnipotent. He opened his arms and hugged Gloria's slender waist from behind. He leaned over and kissed her earlobe. Then he hugged her soft body tightly in his arms. The two people's ears and noses rubbed against each other as they enjoyed this moment of intimacy. After a moment, Soren turned Gloria's body around. Then he looked at her beautiful face and leaned over to kiss her lips. Gloria couldn't help but close her eyes. Then she wrapped her hands around Soren's neck. Compared to last night's inexperience, she had learned some tricks from Soren. She could occasionally fight back when their lips and tongues were chasing each other. Her breath was a little short, and her charming face was blushing. "Do it again?" Soren was slightly panting. His hands were already holding her full breasts and gently kneading them through her clothes. Gloria's body trembled a little. She gently shook her head and said, "No. It still hurts a little. How about you let me drink a bottle of healing potion first?" At first she obviously wanted to refuse. But when she felt Soren's heat and firmness, she couldn't help but gently bite her lips. Then she made a suggestion that made Soren laugh uncontrollably. Soren rarely laughed. But when Gloria said that she wanted to drink a bottle of healing potion first, he seemed to have been poked at a certain laughing point. He suddenly didn't want to continue the exercise. Instead, he hugged her tightly and kissed her on the lips. The two hugged each other for a little while. Then Soren was kicked out by a blushing Gloria. Because his fingers were not honest at all. In fact, no rogue's hands were honest. Gloria wanted to continue her experiment before they left for the outer islands. As a noble and powerful northern witch, she would never forget herself because of sexual pleasure. Although she enjoyed the pleasure brought to her by Soren, it was just an ornament in life. She still had a very important project to complete as soon as possible. Because Gloria had a hunch that if she went to the outer islands, she might not have time to come back in a short time. P.S. Carvin. I've only written this much after a whole day. I don't know how it's going. I don't have any today. The novel Lord of the Abyss will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there's a 100% chance of a lucky draw for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow it. Hurry up. Chapter 331. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, please search for the official WeChat account Dread, and follow it to give more support to Lord of the Abyss. Most of the northern witches had special prophecy and divination abilities. This often made them have quite amazing intuition, and they could vaguely feel some fragments of the future. For example, Soren had only stayed here for a day, and he found that the northern cities seemed to be preparing for war, and it seemed that they had been preparing for it for some time. The food, weapons, important materials, and so on here were now all under the unified management of the Council of Higher Witches. Compared to other places, the response of the north was quite fast. Soren was also calculating the time when the time of troubles would begin. At the latest, the first batch of gods and saints would appear around October this year, and now it was almost February. Who could better deal with the time of troubles in the future would depend on the preparations in the next 8 months. Because once the war between the gods began, all kinds of divine power would wreak havoc in the mortal world, and at that time, it would be difficult to produce. In addition, the abyss demons would invade the material plane, and the purgatory devils would sow discord everywhere. At that time, the resources of the entire material plane would be scarce. Soren had been hoarding food, and Snake Island had now become a big granary. It could be said that the price of food on the south coast had basically increased by more than 50% because of his large purchases, and the price of food continued to rise, and it was estimated that it would more than double around March. At noon the next day, Soren's pirates brought back a message. The fleet he ordered had arrived at the Deepwater port, but because of the fear of Soren's power, the Deepwater port refused to let Soren's fleet dock, and it also urgently reported to the Higher Witches' Council. If it weren't for Gloria's identity, the Higher Witches' Council would have directly expelled Soren's fleet. The stronger the power, the more attention it would attract. The fleet Soren ordered had the threat of capturing a port city, so in the end, even if Gloria was there, the fleet couldn't dock. Let them stop at the entrance of the sea. Soren took a look at the topographic map of the north, pointed at a location, and then said, "Send the first batch of things back first. I'm currently negotiating a deal with the Witch Council, so it may take 2 days." One-Eyed Dragon, who was standing in front of Soren, bowed and said, "Don't worry, sir. I'll bring the first batch of items onto the ship now." Soon One-Eyed Dragon left with a group of people. Soren stood on the balcony of the Wizard Tower and watched the caravan leave. He then turned around and walked towards the direction of the laboratory. Gloria seemed to be very busy as she was in her research mode. They didn't spend much time together in the past 2 days because Gloria was very busy and so was Soren. Soren had never been a pretentious person. Since he had such a close relationship with Gloria, it would be quite stupid if he did not use his relationship with her to seek cooperation from the Witch Council. The Witch Council was quite rich in resources. And they also had something that Soren was very short of, that was, a large number of rare-grade equipment. That's right. Any wizard alliance would carry out high-value arms trade, including alchemy weapons, rare-grade equipment, puppet golems, and so on. This kind of trade was difficult to buy without connections. The heavy footsteps of the clay golem sounded. Soren heard the dull voice of the clay golem behind him. It opened its mouth and said, "Sir." There is a wizard named Saruman who wants to see you. Saruman? When he heard the name, Soren was a little startled. Immediately, he remembered that he mentioned to Gloria in the letter that he needed a wizard who was proficient in alchemy and could refine large quantities of guano stones into high-quality fertilizers. Yesterday, Gloria mentioned to Soren that someone would come to see him today, but she didn't say his name. He didn't expect it to be Saruman. This name was not common in the north. It made him think that he had misheard. Soren heard the words and nodded gently. I know. Bring him in. A clay golem walked in with a male wizard who was not young. He had a beard that was close to gray, and his face looked rather old. However, his wizard profession level was not high, probably only around level 10. This meant that his talent was not very good. Not all wizards could progress all the way. Many wizards were stuck at the threshold of grade 3 for their whole lives. Otherwise, Gloria could have become a member of the High Witch Council when she was only about grade 4. There were also many male wizards under the Northern Witch Council, and Saruman was one of them. He should not be young. Even if he did not use a special ceremony to prolong his life, his face was so old that he was nearly 60 or 70 years old. Soren was observing the old wizard in front of him, and the other wizard was also observing Soren. From any point of view, this was a wizard who would never be able to advance to the legendary level. Although he was dressed neatly, he looked a little messy. His eyes were tired and bloodshot, as if he had not had a good rest for a long time. A part of his staff could be seen, but it did not look like it was repaired. Just as Gloria had said, this was an adept who was in dire straits and was in dire straits. Wizards were very rich. But most of the time they were short of money. Even Gloria's liquid funds were not as much as 1/3 of Soren's. Otherwise, this woman would not have taken more than 30,000 Kindler coins from Soren when they were intimate last night. She needed a lot of expensive alchemy materials. Anyone who had dealt with trade knew that the ratio of liquid funds was actually very tight. If Soren did not do business without capital, perhaps the capital chain would not be as abundant as it was now. This kind of wizard happened to be what Soren needed. Because wizards with too much potential were not easy to control, wizards with the potential to advance might not be willing to work under Soren. It just so happened that this kind of wizard's profession level was not high, and he was not young either. He might not have much ambition to advance to the legendary level, but at the same time he had a lot of alchemy experience. This was the kind of person Soren needed. Before you came, they should have told you what happened, right? Soren looked at the old wizard named Saruman in front of him and slowly said, Your job for the next 3 years is to serve me. I will pay you 12,000 Kindler coins every year. At the same time, you can also pay the price to exchange spells, knowledge and materials from Gloria. She will give you a higher exchange authority. A wizard's debt was divided up layer by layer. The expensive cost of learning spells must be divided up among the low-grade wizards. Otherwise the cost of training a high-grade wizard would be too high. Soren set the time limit for 3 years. For him, 3 years was enough. By then, if this wizard in front of him wanted to stay, he could stay. If not, he could leave. For a wizard like this who had no chance of advancing to the legendary level, it should not be a problem for him to work for him for a year or so. Okay. The old wizard named Saruman looked at Soren. He was a little confused because Soren looked like a wizard, but he obviously had the sharp senses of a rogue. He might be a part-time adventurer. He lowered his head slightly to show his respect. No matter how you looked at it, Soren could stand in the wizard tower and talk to him. There was no doubt that his status was higher. The low-grade wizards usually respected high-grade wizards. He nodded slowly and said, According to the contract, I will go to the outer islands to work for you for 3 years. You will pay me 12,000 Kindler coins every year. After 3 years I can decide whether to stay or leave. Soren looked at him and replied, Yes. If there is no problem, let's sign the contract. You can prepare. We will leave in 3 days. The price of hiring a wizard was very expensive. Although Gloria also knew alchemy, there was no way she could turn guano stones into fertilizer. Saruman in front of him was also a wizard who knew alchemy. Gloria said that he had good alchemy skills, so this kind of thing should not be a problem for him. When the high-quality fertilizer was produced, Soren would have one more source of income. At the same time, the cultivation of the outer islands would rise. Basically, it would be easy to be self-sufficient. Because of Gloria's existence, Soren did not have to worry about the wizard in front of him playing any tricks. Therefore, he readily paid half a year's worth of remuneration. Anyway, after killing the adult white dragon, his value had increased by a lot. He had more money in his hands and the goods from the east were easy to sell in the north. The witches simply could not refuse the fine silk and porcelain. No matter in which era, the spending potential of women was quite amazing. These rich witches could easily sell more than 100,000 Kindler coins. There were not many things that could be taken away from the wizard tower. Because although Gloria was in charge of the wizard tower, it was not her personal property. Hiring an alchemist wizard was only a part of Soren's plan. In addition, he also wanted a batch of extraordinary weapons to equip his elite guards. The limit of the military weapons that could be bought in the South Coast was the exquisitely crafted military weapons. These weapons were still far from being Grade 1 extraordinary equipment. Soren wanted to buy more than 100,000 Kindler coins worth of Grade 1 extraordinary weapons from the Witch Council to equip his pirate corps. This kind of +1 extraordinary weapon could only be equipped by the elite corps on land, so whether he could buy it or not depended on Gloria's authority. This kind of large arms trade must be approved by the Witch Council. According to the current market price, the price of a Grade 1 extraordinary weapon was about 200 Kindler coins. This time, Soren was ready to buy equipment to equip 500 elites. The elite troops in a small city might not be equipped with such a high level of equipment. The novel Lord of the Abyss will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there will be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the top right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow. Hurry up. Chapter 332. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, search for the WeChat public account Dread, and follow it. Give more support to Lord of the Abyss. Another day passed. Soren didn't know how Gloria's research was going, so he didn't disturb her. This time, Gloria's research was on the analysis of the special metal of the Githyanki's. The related research had been going on for decades, and she relied on her authority to get the corresponding information. Now what she had to do was to reanalyze it according to the information, and then master its characteristics. Whether she could make a breakthrough or not depended on whether she could find a new research direction. So now Gloria was like learning knowledge, not making an academic breakthrough, and the progress of her mastery was quite fast. Soren was also very curious about the Githyanki's memory transformation metal, because he felt that this thing was quite high-end. Even in the Star Age, the research on memory metal was not so supernatural, and it could even automatically transform. So for Gloria's research progress, Soren basically fully supported it. He would find ways to buy any expensive materials she wanted. Even if this thing couldn't be used to make golems for the time being, it was quite amazing to be able to make Soren a weapon that could transform. The transformation of the Githyanki's weapon required psionic energy. Soren didn't have psionic energy, so he could use the silver sword of Githyanki's, but there was no way to transform it. So if Gloria's research progress had a breakthrough, maybe she could try to make it have the ability to transform through energy storage. For a top rogue like Soren, weapon transformation could definitely burst out extraordinary combat power. The third day. Even with Gloria's status as a member of the Witch Council, Soren waited until the day after tomorrow to receive the news of the Council's approval. The Witch Council had quite strict control over the bulk food and weapons trade in the north. Not to mention such extraordinary weapons, even ordinary military weapons were quite strict. This was because the senior witches in the north were more confident. If it were in other places such as some kingdoms in the south, it was estimated that even the bulk iron trade would be strictly controlled. Just like the salt and iron monopolies in the Central Plains, many kingdoms were worried that their weapons would fall into the hands of outsiders. For example, lizard men, half-orcs, gnolls, and so on. It would be better if they fell into the hands of human rebels. Once they fell into the hands of these humanoid creatures who were born with extraordinary strength, their combat strength would be greatly improved with a large number of weapons and equipment. Your Excellency. A middle-aged man who looked like a clerk walked up to Soren and lowered his head slightly. The things you want have been delivered. This is the bill that needs to be paid. The council is waiting for me to report back. Behind him were 3 heavy steel golems as well as several city guards dressed as guards. It was an arms deal worth nearly 100,000 Kindler coins. Even the Witch Council had sent out steel golems to protect them. Although the middle-aged man in front of him was dressed as a clerk, he was actually a Grade 3 wizard. Relying on his relationship with Gloria, Soren finally managed to purchase a batch of rare Grade 1 firearms from the Witch Council. At the same time, he also received the implicit support of the Witch Council. Since they were willing to sell him firearms, the Witch Council had obviously accepted Soren's identity. No problem. Soren gave a look to the second mate behind him and then opened a box. Inside the box there were swords and weapons neatly arranged. All he ordered were weapons. Half of the pirates' combat strength was supported by weapons. On the contrary, they didn't need much armor. Moreover, Soren had a dragon and a group of Quetzalcoatlus near his camp. If he needed armor, he could make a batch of high-quality leather armor himself. Pirates basically didn't wear heavy metal armor. Their combat style wasn't suitable for heavy armor. Clang. Soren pulled out a long sword and then glanced at its attributes. Item type: long sword, +1, enchanted. Item grade: grade 1 rare item. Item description: a weapon made of exquisite 100-fold forged steel. During the forging process, other special materials were mixed in. It was made using the Northern Folding Forged Steel process. After the completion, a simple alchemy enchantment was performed. The blade of this weapon has basic runes engraved on it. It can cause additional damage after hitting the enemy. Requirements: 8 points of strength. Effects: folding forged steel, +2 sharpness, +1 penetration, +1 energy damage. In terms of attributes, such a grade 1 weapon couldn't be compared to Soren's curved sword +1. After all, these were rare grade weapons that were mass-produced. However, as rare grade weapons made in the north, they all had a rather obvious characteristic. That was, all of these weapons had undergone a simple enchantment process. Although it was only a 1-point increase in energy damage, it had a significant impact on the battle, especially when dealing with some enemies. Clang. Soren swung his sword and slashed an ordinary short sword. The latter was directly cut in half, but the former didn't even have a scratch. After all, a rare grade weapon was still a rare grade weapon. Once compared with ordinary weapons, the gap was quite obvious. He nodded to his men next to him, and immediately 2 people carried a heavy box over. Basically, Soren's profits from this trip were all in it. Even the income from killing the white dragon was mostly used on this batch of weapons. It could be said that with this batch of weapons, the pirates under his command would have the combat power equivalent to a city's standing army, whether it was dealing with the indigenous people or another pirate king. Even if they attacked the cities on the south coast in the future, the elite pirates under Soren's command would have the ability to fight against the regular army. Of course, Soren couldn't always stay overseas. When the time was right, he would eventually extend his hand back to the mainland. Time gradually approached February. Soren unexpectedly stayed here for 5 more days, and then waited for Gloria to complete her research on the Silver Sword of Gith. After that, they embarked on the journey back to the outer islands. Before leaving, Soren took another look at the port city in the north. He didn't know if it would be as peaceful as it was now the next time he came. Because there were powerful northern witches here, it wasn't very affected. He just received news that a kingdom in the south had fallen into war. Duke Pidner, a southern noble that Soren had never heard of. 3 days ago, he publicly announced his dissatisfaction with the cruel rule of the king and other nobles. Then he led his loyal army to launch a rebellion. This was the news on the surface. From Gloria's mouth, Soren also learned another part, that was, the Witch Council investigated and found that there were demons active in it. This rebellious kingdom was embedded in Soren's territory. The novel Lord of the Abyss will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform, and there will be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the upper right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow. Hurry up. Chapter 333. P.S. If you want to hear more of your voices and receive more of your suggestions, please search for Dread on WeChat and follow it. Give more support to Lord of the Abyss. The cold sea breeze blew in his face. Perhaps because last winter was too cold, this year's snow melted much later than in previous years. It was almost February in the south, but the coastal areas were still quite cold. The journey back was basically quite peaceful. No one would be stupid enough to disturb a pirate king, and there was also a quasi-legendary northern witch in the fleet. So Soren had nothing to do along the way. His task was to catch up on his knowledge of spells and try to learn all the level 1 spells at the same time. This was the foundation of all spells. Most of the later spell models were made up of level 1 spells as the foundation. Level 0 spells were only considered as tricks, and they were not popular among wizards. Learning spells naturally needed some spice, so Soren was always willing to explore Teacher Gloria's exquisite body in his spare time. There seemed to be endless life mysteries in the valley, and he could not help but indulge in the sea of knowledge. Although this research could easily evolve into a fierce confrontation in the end, both of them were undoubtedly powerful. Soren's combat power was naturally needless to say. Although Gloria's physique was not as good, she naturally had other ways as a high-grade witch. So in the end they were evenly matched, and in the end they had to shake hands and rest before fighting again. Life at sea was quite interesting, but even the patient Gloria felt a little bored after half a month of sailing. So Soren stopped at the shipwreck harbor, and then after a simple rest, he went to Port Tylon. Soren did not put too much energy into the rebellion of the kingdom in the south, because he did not have enough ability to intervene on land. If the rebellion lasted long enough and was not extinguished in a short time, it was worth Soren's investment. He was one of the 3 pirate kings on the south coast. Even if he wanted to intervene in this matter, it was basically impossible for Soren to help the kingdom's army. If he wanted to get more benefits, he would have to invest in the rebels in the end. So no matter what he thought now, it depended on whether the rebels had the strength. If they could not even hold on for 3 to 5 months, then Soren was not worth investing any resources in. This level of rebellion could not make any waves. The southern kingdom was seriously decadent. But no matter how decadent the kingdom was, it still had a strong foundation. Soren could still be domineering at sea, but it was not so easy on land. Moreover, there were many strange places and there might be demons mixed in. Whether he wanted to get involved in this muddy water depended on whether the benefits were big enough and how confident he was. Soren's plan was naturally not simple. Port Tylon. Soren's return made the people who had a trace of uncertainty suddenly calm down. At the same time, when they learned through various channels or bribed the pirates' spies etc., that Soren had actually won over the powerful Northern Witch Council and reached a trade agreement with them, the others immediately set off a huge wave in their hearts. The value of trading with the Witch Council was not just to buy a batch of rare equipment to arm his men. There was a deeper meaning behind it. Even if there was not much meaning in the eyes of others, it was not simple. Not to mention that this time, many core members of the pirates knew about Gloria's existence, and Soren did not deliberately hide his close relationship with Gloria from others. So basically, the pirate leaders under Soren knew about Gloria's identity, and they also knew that she might become everyone's mistress. The pirate's address for Soren was a bit similar to "My Lord," which could be understood as "Your Excellency" or "Master." For Gloria, whether it was strength or status, she was enough to easily crush these rebellious pirate leaders. Perhaps in the past, some people thought that Soren's background was not enough, and they might have a little bit of ulterior motives. But after the appearance of Gloria, her identity had completely made everyone give up. If Soren married this noble northern witch, then it was tantamount to having a powerful ally. The identity of the Pirate King and the members of the Senior Witch Council were strong enough to suppress anyone who had other thoughts. Such a combination of strength was eventually enough to make anyone not dare to act rashly, and even make people with malicious intentions feel panic. In fact, some people had begun to pass the news back, and at the same time, it also caused many people to worry. Port area. Soren's fleet entered Port Tylon. Because of the supply of overseas trade, the protection fee flag, set by Soren made the pirates live quite well, and no one was attacked by them in the near future. The world needed rules. Soren made a rule, and others felt that this rule was not bad and could bring them greater benefits, so they began to abide by it. While these people followed Soren's rules, they also developed a sense of awe in their hearts. The warship approached the port, and the other merchant ships made way for it. Soren stood on the deck in a black suit. He bowed his head slightly and made an inviting gesture. Then he took Gloria, who had a quiet and elegant smile on her face, and walked towards the city of Port Tylon. He was like a noble lord patrolling the territory with his wife, with a strong sense of confidence on his face, but not the slightest complacency. He was showing his strength. To be able to build such a foundation in just a few months, who would dare to say that he had no strength? There was a slight commotion ahead. When Soren took Gloria's white hand and walked down the warship, the figure of the temple guard appeared in the distance. Then he saw the crowd around him disperse, and he knew that the Naga Siren priest had appeared. This undoubtedly surprised Soren a little, and then there was a smile on his face. Because the Naga Siren priest greeted him in this situation, it was also a kind of affirmation of his strength. It was a very proud act. But before Soren could be happy, his face stiffened. Because the Naga Siren priest did not look at him at all, but went directly to Gloria, bowed slightly and smiled. "Welcome to Port Tylon, Your Excellency the Witch." Soren's face was livid. In order to let the Naga Siren priest come out to greet him, he forced her to bow her head. But even then the Naga Siren priest did not greet him with such a low posture. But now that Gloria came to Port Tylon, the Naga Siren priest took the initiative to greet him, and her posture was so low. Comparing the experience of the two, Soren suddenly felt quite unhappy. Even if Gloria was already his woman, he was still quite unhappy. The difference in status was completely two extremes. The status of a high-grade mage was vividly displayed at this moment. Facing the low posture of the Naga Siren priest, Gloria nodded and smiled naturally, but she quickly noticed that Soren's face next to her was not very good. So this smart woman naturally turned slightly sideways, and then took the initiative to hold Soren's arm instead of her hand being held by him. This way. Suddenly the atmosphere looked completely different. At first they were walking hand in hand, but now it was Gloria gently holding Soren's arm and leaning on his shoulder. Soren, who was deliberately ignored by the Naga Siren priest, suddenly became the protagonist of the scene. Even the Naga Siren priest became a foil. At this moment, Soren's eyes were very soft. It was a tenderness that was rarely seen in his eyes. Gloria glanced at him and a smile appeared at the corner of her mouth. Then she blinked inadvertently. If it wasn't for the fact that they were in public, Soren would have hugged her and kissed her. In the face of Gloria's initiative to let Soren become the protagonist, the Naga Siren priest's face was undoubtedly not very good. It seemed that all the rumors were true. In just a few days, Soren relied on his strong male charm and reproductive organs to completely conquer a noble northern witch. She was also a powerful high-grade witch with the status of a member of the Witch Council. Note, all the above are anecdotes of the tavern, and the more they spread, the more ridiculous they become. Especially the pirates under Soren's command like to brag about it. Tell everyone how awesome their leader is. Even the noble northern witches have been conquered by him. Those noble ladies and young ladies will all want him when they see him. Everyone knew the things that were spread in the tavern. However, some words would be said 100 times and in the end people would believe it. Slowly the story became reliable. Please? The Naga Siren priest tested the relationship between the two. She could not help but squeeze out a stiff smile on her face and slowly said, "I have prepared a place for your excellency." Gloria's status was more noble than many city lords. In fact, she was the ruling class above the city lords in the north. Even if this ruling power belonged to the Witch Council, she was not inferior to the Naga Siren priest in terms of status. Therefore, the Naga Siren priest's attitude of greeting her was actually to show goodwill to the Witch Council. She took the initiative to invite her to arrange a place for her. It was also prepared according to the specifications of welcoming other city lords. No matter how close the relationship between Soren and Gloria was, and whether she could still control him in the future, these were all things in the future. The most important thing for the Naga Siren priest now was to find a way to get in touch with the Witch Council. If she could get in touch with the Witch Council, then she would have a powerful ally. Soren's growth had completely exceeded the Naga Siren priest's estimation. Especially now that he had the help of the northern witches, he had directly become the most powerful pirate king force on the south coast. It seemed that there would soon be a reshuffle here. P.S. Today's update. For the time being, quantity is not enough. We can only work on quality. The novel Lord of the Abyss will have more fresh content on the official WeChat platform. At the same time, there will be a 100% lucky draw gift for everyone. Open WeChat now, click the plus sign on the upper right to add friend, search for the public account Dread, and follow. Hurry up. Chapter 334. The arrival of Gloria had made Soren even more powerful. No one could ignore a powerful high-grade witch, not to mention that she was also a member of the Witch Council and had her own territory. Information about Gloria could not be hidden from others. After all, she had ruled a city in the north for nearly 10 years. Gloria had reached the high grade 10 years ago, which level 15 or above, but she had only recently touched the threshold of a legendary witch, which level 18 or above. The higher the level of a wizard, the slower the speed of improvement. Soren was completely different. The lifespan of a legendary witch was quite long, far longer than any melee profession. Therefore they also had many requirements when choosing a spouse. Otherwise they would still be in their prime but their spouse might already be old. In terms of lifespan, legendary melee professions were at a disadvantage. Perhaps it was because too much blood and injury was consumed before the advancement. The lifespan of a legendary melee profession was only 1/3 of that of a spellcaster profession. Sometimes they might not even live for 200 years. Gloria chose Soren because she valued his potential. Legendary and non-legendary were people from two different worlds. The Sea Temple. After sending away Soren and Gloria, the Naga Siren priest's face suddenly became gloomy. Call the deep sea hunters. The sea priest stood in front of the statue of the goddess with a scepter in her hand and ordered the servants around her. Immediately spread the news of Gloria. We must let Astrid know as soon as possible. In this way he will be afraid and panic. It is very likely that he will destroy Soren at all costs, or even let the Naga Siren royal family launch a conspiracy in advance. Otherwise he is doomed to be defeated in the end. As long as a war breaks out between them, Soren's strength will be weakened. He has already controlled most of the interests of the outer islands. I must weaken his strength and then control the power of the sea. Only then can I be qualified to compete for the position of the high priest. I have a hunch that the goddess will soon give a new oracle. Only the high priest is the closest position to the goddess. A trace of ambition that was deeply hidden surfaced. The Naga Siren priest turned and entered the pool in front of the temple. A wave of divine power poured into her body, and then her blue skin gradually became transparent. Something like scales could be seen faintly falling off. This was the power of faith gathered by the Sea Temple. Since she was rewarded by the sea goddess with a trace of divinity, she could try to absorb this power. The divine power gathered in the Sea Temple was changing her little by little. Eventually she would completely break away from the scope of ordinary things. She might become the chosen one of the saints, or she might have the opportunity to step into a higher realm. However, she had to first suppress those fellows with ill intentions within the Naga clan. Distorted shadows appeared in the seawater. A creature whose shape could not be seen clearly but was filled with a terrifying presence appeared. It hid in the seawater beneath the temple and used a strange voice to express its emotions. The Naga Siren priest took off her priest robe and looked at the blurred deep-sea hunter. She said slowly, "Pay attention to the restless Naga Siren royal family. If there is any movement, immediately open the door of the abyss. Let the pet of the goddess grant them release." Speaking of this, the Naga Siren priest showed a cruel smile on her bewitching face. The blurry shadow gradually disappeared into the distance. They could feel its body twisting in the water. Although they couldn't see its shape, they could feel the dangerous aura coming from it. It was the aura of a terrifying predator. Eastern Sea Route. On an island near the Eastern Trade Junction area, which was similar to Port Tylon, it was also the territory of the pirate king Ashrod. "What did you say?" A man with a cold face listened to the report of his subordinate in front of him and said with an ugly face, "He actually roped in a high-grade witch? How is this possible? How could the proud northern witches take a fancy to a mere pirate king? Is this the witch council preparing to intervene in the south coast? No. How can the witch council be interested in the interests of the south coast? This is the territory of the Sea Temple. Damn it. I knew it. I had to kill the throat cutter at the beginning. I didn't expect him to grow so fast. No. Immediately send someone to contact the Duchess of the Principality of Rossard. The last time she was attacked by the Sea Temple in the Outer Islands, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife suffered the greatest loss. She must also hate the throat cutter to the bone. She must not be willing to give up the interests of the Outer Islands so easily. Maybe we can try to form an alliance with her." Hearing his words, a half-Naga woman next to him who looked obviously not human hesitated and said slowly, "Your Excellency, the Duke of Red Dragon is now an enemy of the Sea Temple. If we contact her openly, it is tantamount to violating the orders of the Sea Temple. In that case, I am afraid the Sea Priest will take the opportunity to attack." The cold man frowned, looked up at her and said slowly, "We can't care so much. If we don't fight for the help of the Duke of Red Dragon's wife, the Naga royal family will not be able to help us now. We may not be able to withstand the joint attack of the throat cutter and the high-grade witch. He already hated us when we dealt with the Swamp King. This time, with the help of the Northern Witch, he will definitely not let it go. Come. I want to write a letter to the Duke of Red Dragon's wife." The Outer Islands route. Soren did not stay in Port Tylon for too long. The Outer Islands were now his foundation. So after dealing with some things for a short time, he led the fleet back to the camp in the Outer Islands. However, this time he brought back quite a lot of people. There were 12 ocean-going ships alone. He had to thank the pirate king Ashrod. It was because Soren's men robbed his fleet that Soren was able to form such a large fleet. This time there were quite a lot of goods transported and more than 800 people were brought over. Half of them were slaves from the mainland. Many of these slaves used to work in the mines. For some reason they had recently fallen into the hands of Soren. It had to be said that a group of bad guys were really efficient. Soren's current batch of slaves could easily dilute the proportion of indigenous slaves. The number of indigenous slaves could not exceed the control. Soren had to get a group of mainland slaves and then slowly turn them into townspeople. Everything could not be given for no reason. Otherwise they would not know how to cherish and be grateful. Soren had a lot of better plans. The voyage was quite boring. The half-month-long voyage forced Soren to turn his energy to learning spells again, and at the same time to explore the secrets of Teacher Gloria. With a high-grade witch as his guide, Soren's speed of learning spells was obviously much faster. Not to mention he also had the talents of encyclopedic knowledge and sage. After learning the most commonly used part of the first circle spells, Gloria suggested that Soren should not continue to learn them. Instead he should familiarize himself with them and increase his casting speed. In other words, she wanted Soren to do in-depth research and rely on proficiency to master the combat ability, proficiency in spell casting. Therefore, Soren's next days were to constantly memorize spells, and then continuously cast spells after memorizing them. After using up all the spell slots he would continue to memorize them. In this way he would obtain the ability, proficiency in spell casting. It was about the third day of the voyage. Soren's battle log showed a string of data belatedly: astral battle, legendary battle. In the middle of January 1676 of the new moon era, when you went to the north to invite the witches to the outer islands, you accidentally encountered the Githyanki's attacking the northern tower. In this legendary event, you chose to help the northern witches deal with the Githyanki's and finally killed an adult red dragon in the battle. This event greatly improved your relationship with the Witch Council, and at the same time, spread your reputation outside the material plane. However, because the Witch Council strictly blocked the news about the astral battle, your legend only spread among the Githyanki's in the astral realm. Legend level +3, it was so late. When Soren joined the Sea Battle of the Betrayers, it was delayed for many days before he got the legend level prompt, but it was not as long as this time. He didn't know if it was because the battle was over now or because of the interplanar battle. However, Soren obviously didn't have time to think so much now. He just glanced at it and put it aside, concentrating on learning how to cast spells skillfully. With the experience of this trip to the astral realm, Soren felt part of the mystery of instant casting in advance, and at the same time he also got a prompt of skillful casting. He was not far from success, and he could feel that he was about to master this spellcasting ability. Day by day the days passed. When Soren led the fleet to the outer islands, someone in the camp immediately came to greet him. He didn't know when, but a lighthouse had been built near the port. At this time, it had been more than a month since Soren left, and it was already early February. According to the arrangement before Soren left, busy construction work was carried out in the camp. Even a relatively simple dock was built near the natural port. Then there was a 5-meter-wide paved road for transporting goods and passage, extending all the way to the east gate of the camp. The fleet began to be busy unloading, and a lot of materials needed to be moved down. Soren looked at the dock in front of him and walked down holding Gloria's hand. Before they set foot on land, Vivian in a white princess dress appeared in front of them. "Brother?" The little girl shouted happily, and then directly jumped into Soren's arms. P.S. The outline has been sorted out. Starting tomorrow 2 chapters will be resumed. The time is 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and it will be updated automatically. Try to stabilize it. It's inevitable that writing a book will have ups and downs. I hope everyone can bear with it. Chapter 335. Vivian. Soren caught the little girl who rushed over, hugged her petite body and turned around. Then he lowered his head and kissed her red cheeks. The little girl wrapped her arms around Soren's neck and hung on his body. She arched in his arms like a kitten and took a deep breath. Then she looked up at Gloria next to her and opened her arms to ask for a hug. Vivian opened her arms and threw herself at her. "Sister Gloria, I missed you so much." Seeing the cute little girl, a gentle smile appeared on Gloria's face. She reached out to catch the little girl and stroked her long hair as she said in a gentle voice, "Vivian, I'm sorry. I missed you too." The little girl hung onto Gloria's body and buried her head in her chest, as if she was very comfortable. After a while, she suddenly frowned slightly and sniffed Gloria's body like a puppy, causing Gloria's expression to become a little uncomfortable. The little girl sniffed Gloria's body and muttered, "Sister Gloria has big brother's smell." Upon hearing Vivian's words, a bright blush appeared on Gloria's face, making her appear particularly charming and alluring. "Oh." The little girl wriggled in her arms, and then moved her little nose to her full chest. She sniffed seriously at the spot near the top, and even used her little hand to pinch it lightly. She muttered to herself, "The smell is the strongest here." Slap. Gloria was a little angry and slapped the little girl's butt gently. Her charming face was already red. She held Vivian and walked forward with her head down. Even her earlobes were already red. Before leaving, she gave Soren a slightly reproachful look. As for Soren, he didn't blush at all. He only looked into the distance to hide his embarrassment. Since when did Vivian's nose become so powerful? She could even tell which part of his body he liked to play with. The little girl seemed to have understood something. After all, she grew up in the slums and was far more mature than other children of her age. She poked her head out and looked at Soren, then looked at the blushing Gloria. She stretched out her pink little finger and scratched her face, saying mischievously, "Shy. Sister Gloria, did you do something shameful with Big Brother?" Slap. "It hurts." The little girl pursed her lips and touched her, but that was slapped again. She didn't say anything else. But her big eyes rolled around a few times. No one knew what she was thinking. However, her expression was one of curiosity. After all, she was just a 9-year-old child. The little girl soon forgot about this matter. Then, she held Gloria's finger with her little white hand and led her around the camp. At the same time, her little face was still full of pride. She pulled Gloria forward and told her that the stone road was just completed the day before yesterday. She was the one who killed all the monsters nearby. The two of them walked for a while, and a fenced encampment appeared in front of them. Now it looked like it had the size of a town. Soren was slightly behind because he had to transport the goods. Vivian led Gloria forward and explained everything in a crisp voice. After all, she was also involved in the construction of the camp. At the same time, it was very different from when Soren left. First of all, the fences were much higher than before. It was now 3 stories thick. It wouldn't be easily knocked down by strong beasts. At the same time, it was convenient to increase the number of arrow towers. There were currently 16 arrow towers in the entire camp. In terms of scale, it was comparable to many medium-sized towns. The next step was to build a city wall. This was too time-consuming and costly. Soren had no plans to build a city wall at the moment. It was estimated that he might not need it for a year or 2. There was a row of guards at the east gate of the camp, but not all of them were lazy pirates. There were also drow warriors. Gloria couldn't help but reveal a surprised expression. Because Soren had some things to tell her, when she saw these drow warriors with cold expressions, even Gloria, who had always been calm, was slightly moved. She seemed to be a little shocked by the speed of Soren's development. It was not easy to subdue a drow. "Miss?" The drow warrior, who looked quite young, bowed his head slightly to the little Vivian. At the same time, he turned his gaze to Gloria. He seemed to have seen a little bit of Gloria's strength. His expression was quite shocked. He bowed his head respectfully and said, "Welcome to the camp, Your Excellency the Witch." Drows were always a race that worshipped the strong. Gloria nodded slightly, then followed Vivian into the camp. She noticed that these drows were not afraid of the sun. It seemed that they were not pure drows but more like half-drows. Only half-drows could move so easily on the ground, and they seemed to have the blood of albino drows. She didn't know where Soren found these people. Such drows were very rare after the fall of the Dark Maiden. There were neat square roads in the camp. It was different from any town Gloria had seen before. As soon as she walked into the camp, she felt a strong visual impact. It was not because of the shocking buildings. Instead, everything here was very neat and tidy, more so than any city she had ever seen. The straight roads were divided into 4 areas, and the drainage canals on both sides were the same. All the houses were built in the same style. They looked very novel and tidy. She couldn't say that they were ingenious buildings, but the neat rows on both sides of the street were pleasing to the eye. With just a glance, Gloria liked this place a little more. She liked this neat and clean environment. There was no feces on the road. Even though there were a lot of people here, there was no foul smell in the air. Although the pirates were a little unrestrained, they obviously knew a lot of rules. When they saw Gloria, who was walking with Vivian, They all bowed slightly to show their respect. There was a blacksmith shop in the corner of the street, and the busiest and noisiest place was the 3 taverns. For the pirates, it was very uncomfortable to have no wine, but there were no common fights here. Because Soren specially set up a martial arts arena, any personal grievances must be solved in the arena. Duels between conflicts between pirates also required the presence of the leaders. Gloria saw a lot of slaves. However, they were different from the slaves in other places. Although they were dressed in rags, they were strong. Their faces were not sallow and thin. Some even looked rosy, which meant that they had more food. From the west gate, she could see carts of bricks and tiles being transported. There were also many areas that had been divided but had not been built yet. Many craftsmen were busy, and among them, there were even obvious oriental faces. Among the rather lazy pirates, there were some pirates with serious expressions who were responsible for patrolling. Gloria saw a trace of an army from them. Basically, in every patrol team there were drow warriors with serious faces. Their equipment and strength were extraordinary. Outside the south gate was a piece of land that was being reclaimed. Groups of indigenous slaves were working in the fields. The first deep plowing required more preparation, and there were fierce-looking pirate supervisors nearby. Quality fertilizer was needed here. Otherwise, the harvest of the first year of reclamation would be very poor, even if the soil here was quite fertile. Gloria silently watched everything in front of her. The more she looked, the more surprised she was because she knew how short Soren was to build all this. It could be said that if it were her, even with the help of the Witch Council, it would be impossible to reach the current scale in a short time, not to mention that there was already a vague prototype of a city here. It was hard to imagine. If Soren was given a period of time to develop, what kind of city could he finally build in the outer islands? Chapter 336. Soren naturally had a lot of things to do. In fact, as soon as he reached the shore, one of his men came to report, but because Gloria was next to him, he waved his hand and told him to wait. Later on, Gloria was taken to the camp by Vivian, and Soren naturally had to deal with the matters during this period of time. Although he left Vivian here, the one in charge was still the pirate leader below. Moreover, Soren found that the relationship between his men seemed to be a little subtle, and there was a faint sign that they were divided into factions. Among the many pirate leaders in name, the one with the highest status should be Adele Isabella. She had the most men and her strength was above the high grade. However, after the half-elf first mate, Casa, was praised by Soren for doing a good job, and after he was given a part of the overseas voyage to take care of, the half-elf first mate status also rose sharply. For a long time, this half-elf first mate had the intention to compete with Adele Isabella. Last time he successfully plundered the pirate King Ashrod's eastern fleet, bringing back a large amount of wealth and an ocean fleet, so his strength had in turn surpassed Adele's. On the other hand, because Adele failed to contact the Alchemy Guild, not only did she not complete Soren's task, but also delayed for a period of time, so before Soren left for the north, he did not have the chance to see her. Therefore, the pirates below were obviously less in awe of her. Pirates were a group of people who respected and obeyed the strong. Since Adele Isabella did not do a good job and did not complete the task of His Excellency Throat Cutter, the pirate leaders below would naturally look down on her. In addition, she was still a woman, so at the moment her position in the camp was more awkward. Before Soren left, the construction of the camp was assigned to the pirate leaders below. Among them, the half-elf first mate was the manager. When Adele Isabella returned to the camp, he naturally would not give her the power in his hands. As a result, Adele was now like a pirate leader with a figurehead. Although she still had a lot of people under her command, she was actually quite idle every day. Other pirate leaders such as the One-Eyed Man, the Butler, the Giant Hunter, all nicknames, and so on were not satisfied with a woman on top of their heads. Therefore, when the half-elf first mate divided the factions, they also formed their own small circles and faintly intended to isolate her. No matter what, it was always more difficult for a woman to stand out among the pirates than a man. Moreover, Adele's strength was not enough to suppress the other pirate leaders. If she was a legendary profession, her position would naturally be unshakable. However, she was only a high-grade professional, and the gap between her and the other pirate leaders was not very big, so once she was isolated, even her subordinates were a little shaken. The pirates weren't fools. Although they were all working for His Excellency Throat Cutter, these pirate minions naturally knew which pirate leader had more power, was more important to His Excellency Throat Cutter, and which pirate leader had more money under him. Therefore, Soren saw Adele's awkward position at a glance. The other pirate leaders stood in a circle, the half-elf first mate stood at the front, and Adele stood alone with her arms crossed. Her expression was a little cold and she didn't like them. "Your Excellency, throat cutter. Your Excellency, throat cutter." When Soren came over, many pirate leaders in front of him immediately bowed their heads to show respect. Adele looked at Soren with a hesitant expression, and finally just stood aside with a lonely expression. She didn't complete the task and this failure made her feel frustrated. "Let people transport the things down." Soren glanced at the others, then his eyes fell on the half-elf first mate and Adele and slowly said, "Everyone else leave. Casa and Adele stay." The pirate leaders below looked at each other, bowed and left. The half-elf first mate glanced at Adele and stood motionless. His Excellency Throat Cutter was a person who valued ability. During this time he desperately rushed the construction. For this reason he even used a little cruel means to suppress the dissatisfaction of his subordinates. Wasn't it to let His Excellency Throat Cutter see his ability? Now the construction progress of the camp had increased by at least 30%. Although there were some cruel means in the process, the people below had been suppressed by him. In all aspects he had completed the task perfectly. Therefore the half-elf first mate was very confident. He believed that His Excellency Throat Cutter knew who could serve him the most. "Well done." Soren glanced at the lighthouse, the road and the dock and slowly said, "It seems that giving these to you is the right decision. Have you encountered any trouble during this time?" Hearing Soren's words, Adele's expression dimmed, and the half-elf first mate showed a confident smile. He bowed his head slightly to show his awe and then said in a deep voice, "There hasn't been any big trouble during this time, but a week ago, we met the indigenous people of other tribes. It seemed to be on the other side of the island. The ones we encountered were all indigenous scouts. They didn't attack us but they sent people to monitor the river. There are also the Quetzalcoatlus nearby. Half a month ago we had 3 slaves taken away from us. But later they didn't attack us again. It should be just an accident. In addition, His Excellency Throat Cutter, we recently found a group of dark-tide fishmen at the port. At present there is no conflict with us but we should still be careful." Soren nodded and said, "I know. Good job. You take people to count the goods and slaves and then settle them in the camp." The half-elf first mate bowed and left. Only Adele Isabella was left in front of Soren. The red-haired female pirate's face was a little sad, and she bowed her head and said, "Your Excellency, I didn't complete the task you gave me." Soren looked at her calmly and said slowly, "I know." Adele's face was complicated. She was a little lost and sad. She murmured, "I'm incompetent." Soren didn't comfort her. He was one of the 3 pirate kings on the south coast. He was not a child who played house. He could rise rapidly in such a short time, and at the same time draw in and control a group of elite pirates. He relied on his clear style of reward and punishment. It was true that Adele did not complete the task. The reason why Soren could make his men work so actively was because he would reward them. Therefore, if he broke the rules on Adele's side, the prestige he had built in the past would be affected. He could not indulge her just because she was a woman. Soren looked at the red-haired female pirate in front of him and said slowly, "You can put down the things in the camp for the time being. I'll be in command of the fleet for the time being. I'll send you to receive the training of the Drow warriors in 2 days. You have very good talent and your strength is much stronger than others. I hope you can touch the edge of legendary as soon as possible. Soon. I'll have a difficult task for you. I hope you learn not only the fighting skills of the Drows, but also their insidious and cunning means. Because the task for you this time is very difficult. You need to deal with many nobles and church people who are good at playing tricks. You must learn to use conspiracy and some cruel means. The Drows are experts in this field." Hearing Soren's first sentence, Adele's face turned pale, and her delicate body shook a little. Because Soren was depriving her of her power, this punishment was too severe for her. But when she heard the next words, her eyes could not help but shine again. She nodded very seriously and said, "Your Excellency, don't worry. I will never let you down again." As long as there was a chance, she could prove herself and regain her power and status. "Very good." Soren looked at her and nodded gently, "Go. I hope to see you enter the legendary realm one day." After that he turned and left. Adele Isabella stood in place and took a deep breath. She stared at Soren's back with a firm expression, and her hands could not help but clench into fists. She was unwilling. How could she be willing to be easily surpassed by a half-elf who was not as good as her? She had the blood of an Amazon flowing in her body. How could she admit defeat so easily? P.S. It will be automatically updated in the future. The time is 5 and 6 o'clock. 2 more. Chapter 337. Soren soon returned to the camp. When he returned to the camp that he had built with his own hands, Soren had a rare sense of pride on his face. It was not easy for him to get to where he was now. From an inconspicuous thief in Amber City to the pirate king who dominated the south coast. He did not know how much blood he had lost and how many injuries he had suffered along the way, but it was all worth it. Especially after seeing the foundation he had built with his own hands, Soren felt a sense of satisfaction in his heart. Because he firmly believed that as long as he was given enough time, he could rely on this place to change everything and even affect the fate of the whole world. On both sides of the spacious avenue were rows of brick houses. Soren looked at these newly built houses with satisfaction and then entered a hidden room in his residence. Your Excellency, throat cutter. A man hidden in the shadows knelt down on one knee and respectfully said to Soren, I have done what you asked. Soren's expression was quite cold. He nodded gently and said, Very good. Is there any movement from the drows? These guys have been quite honest after I left, right? This was a rogue. And it was a rogue with a profession level of 12 or above. Not all pirates were warriors. Although very few spellcasters became pirates, it did not mean that there were no other professions. Soren was a very careful person. Therefore, from the moment he became the pirate king, he arranged another group of trustworthy elites. The number of these people was very small, less than 2 digits so far, but all of them were rogues with potential and had received simple training from Soren. They were good at sneaking and spying. Perhaps these people's combat power was not very high, but they obviously had more important uses. As a rogue, Soren attached great importance to intelligence and spies. Your Excellency. The man hidden in the shadows handed a file to Soren and then said, The drows have contacted their tribe several times and secretly sent some things back. However, there was no obvious movement. Because we were afraid of being discovered by them, we did not get too close. Soren did not trust the drows. In fact, anyone who had been to the Underdark would not easily trust the drows. Because of Soren's current strength, these drows did not dare to act rashly and obeyed his orders. But as long as Soren was a little weaker, they would feel that they had an opportunity. The possibility of these drows betraying him was quite high. Because this was their nature. Soren glanced at the scroll, then put it away and said, Very good. I got it. Be careful and hide. Don't expose yourselves so easily. After that, Soren turned around and left the room. He had thousands of pirates under his command, but there were not many who could be of use to him. At the end of the day, his foundation was still lacking. Everything had to start from scratch. On the other side of the camp, under the escort of a team of pirates, Saruman, wearing a gray robe, came to the laboratory where he worked. He had an independent yard and brought a lot of alchemy equipment for his work. When he saw the camp, he was a little stunned and then said, It seems that the place I'm going to stay in the future is not too bad. Saruman directed the 3 wizard apprentices he brought to set up the room and carefully move the experimental equipment in. Then he looked around the environment a little. It was not difficult to turn guano stones into high-quality fertilizer. The more troublesome thing was that if he could not form high-end craftsmanship, then he would need to do it himself. His task was to find ways to turn it into a process that could be completed by wizard apprentices or ordinary people. This was not too difficult for an experienced alchemist because it was much easier to construct a steel golem and give it intelligence than this kind of chemical alchemy technique. Saruman was not in a hurry to start work. After he settled his luggage, he walked around the camp. He was a little curious about everything about Soren. Your Excellency, wizard. A drow ranger patrolling the periphery stopped Saruman in front of him. He glanced at him, put his hand on his chest and said, Please don't go near there. There are dangerous plants there, some man-eating plants. Man-eating plants? Saruman heard this and showed a curious expression. He reached out and clenched his staff and slowly said, Young man, don't worry. A wizard will not be in danger so easily. After that he walked directly into the jungle. The drow ranger behind him hesitated for a moment, but he did not stop him from entering. However, he did not follow him. The plants inside were too strange. After Saruman entered, he frowned slightly. Then he cast 2 protective spells and moved forward carefully. A wizard could be confident, but he could not be arrogant. This old wizard had a lot of experience. He cautiously entered the forest and observed the plants nearby. Interesting. Interesting. Saruman seemed to have found something. He approached a huge mutated man-eating flower. After he sprinkled a little strange yellow powder, he did not know why this deadly plant did not attack. Instead, it swayed slightly as if it was asleep. Saruman walked around the mutated man-eating flower. There was a trace of obsession on his face. He reached out and stroked the roots of the man-eating flower and murmured, "Beautiful, dangerous, deadly." At the same time, full of strong vitality. He closed his eyes and took a deep breath as if he was feeling something. He said to himself, "There's also the smell of magic. Who created you?" Saruman carefully used his dagger to cut open the roots of the man-eating flower, and then took away some blood-like liquid. After that, he circled around and took away some seed-like things, and then slowly left the place. On the other side, Gloria was also brought to her residence by Vivian. She was settled next to the big house where Soren lived. Meow. When Gloria was pulled into the room by the little girl, she suddenly heard a cat's meow. Then she saw Vivian rush in with a cheer, and then she pulled out a little girl with obvious beast characteristics. The little girl was about the same height as Vivian. She wore a beautiful floral dress, had a pair of furry cat ears and a curled tail. Other than that, she was similar to a human. Gloria had been shocked many times today, so when she saw the cat girl in front of her, she calmed down a lot. She frowned and said, "Beast? Cat girl? I thought this kind of creature was extinct." Vivian pushed the little cat girl in front of Gloria and smiled, "Sister Gloria. Her name is Lulu Meow. Don't look at her small size. She's actually very strong." Gloria couldn't help but smile. She looked at the cat girl who was about the same height as Vivian and teased, "Is she very strong? What can she do?" The little girl nodded confidently and said in a crisp voice, "She can do somersaults." Gloria chuckled and reached out to stroke the little girl's head. Then she looked at the cat girl and said slowly, "Can she speak?" The cat girl seemed to understand something and opened her mouth and said, "Meow. Lol. Meow." Gloria showed a look of understanding and said slowly, "It seems that she still can't speak. But it's okay, let me help you." She opened her mouth and uttered a strange spell, and then a magic light appeared in her palm. When Gloria pressed her palm on the cat girl's forehead, the other party's petite body trembled, and then her eyes became blank. This blankness lasted for about half a minute, and then her expression became clear. She opened her mouth and said like a child who had just learned to speak, "Lou. Lul. Sister. Ma. Master." Just a few words. She seemed to be a little anxious and her voice suddenly changed, "Meow. Lul. Meow." Gloria leaned over and stroked the cat girl's little head. She said slowly, "Don't worry. I just helped you with a spell. It can help you complete the enlightenment, but you still need to learn it slowly." Chapter 338. The cat girl's intelligence didn't seem to be very high. In fact, most war-creatures weren't very smart, but that didn't matter too much because they were born with the talent, beast intuition. Even if their wisdom wasn't very high, these war-creatures still had strong intuition. They had a beast-like intuition for many things, and they were even more powerful when fighting in the wild. This kind of creature was actually quite rare because they weren't a naturally occurring species, but intelligent creatures that were created by some taboo experiments. It was said that there were two types of war creatures. One type was like the gnolls, with the head of a gnoll and the torso of a humanoid creature. The other type was like the cat girl in front of them, with the appearance of a human and some of the characteristics of a beast. The former was a natural reproduction, while the latter was man-made. All the rumors pointed to the taboo experiments during the Arcane Empire, because there were clear records at that time that there were great arcanists who mixed the blood of humans and animals in order to cultivate excellent servants with special purposes. They also touched the field of life and created a new species. For thousands of years, there were always conspiracy scholars who believed that the fall of the Arcane Empire was closely related to the taboo field of life. Lul. The petite cat girl opened her mouth and seemed to be a little happy. She stuttered, "Brother? Brother. What? Your Excellency. Master." Hungry? Her syllables were a little childish, and when she said it too quickly, it became meow. Lul. Meow. The cat girl said the words that she heard the most. After saying about 30 to 50 words in a row, her body suddenly trembled, and she nimbly hid behind Vivian. Meow. The little cat girl seemed to be a little frightened, and she felt goosebumps all over her body. She hid behind Vivian and screamed at the door. Vivian patted the cat girl's little head and said in a clear voice, "Lulu meow? What's wrong?" Gloria raised her head and looked at the door, and then saw Soren's figure coming in from outside. When he noticed that everyone inside was looking at him, he was a little stunned and asked in confusion, "What's wrong? Why are you all looking at me?" Vivian turned around and stroked the feline girl's hair. "Don't worry, Lulu. Big brother won't hurt you." The petite cat girl curled up her body and looked at Soren with fear in her eyes. It was like a wild beast seeing a tiger, or a new recruit who had just left the battlefield meeting a veteran who had survived hundreds of battles. Her beastly instincts made her feel something from Soren's body. It was a very thick smell of blood, which meant that the person in front of her had slaughtered many lives. Ever since she first laid eyes on Soren, he was the person she feared the most. He was even more frightening than the pirates who had captured her. Even after spending so much time with Vivian, she still couldn't get rid of her fear of Soren. Slayer. One life after another ended. Soren's body gave off a bloody aura that normal people couldn't detect. Only a war creature like her could sense it. Perhaps Vivian's comforting words had some effect on him. The feline girl gradually gathered her courage and looked at Soren, but she still hid behind the little girl. "Come." Vivian took the feline girl's little hand and brought her to an open space. She then said seriously, "Lulu meow. Do a few somersaults. Show them what you're capable of." Perhaps because of the distance, the feline girl's nervous expression relaxed a lot. Her little hand was held by Vivian, and she seemed a little hesitant. When she met the little girl's gaze, she couldn't help but gently nod. Then Vivian retreated to the side, and the little feline girl stood on the spot and did a backflip. Not 360 degrees. It was a full 720 degrees backflip. The feline girl's petite figure landed lightly after 2 somersaults in the air, as if she didn't feel anything at all. Her limbs were so flexible that it made people speechless. Her slender waist was as if there were no bones. But this was just the beginning. The feline girl's petite body somersaulted in the air, and her speed was so fast that it was dazzling. This meant that not only did she have amazing tenacity, agility, and coordination, but she also had physical strength that was far beyond ordinary people. Meow. The petite feline girl did a side somersault and landed on the wall, but she didn't fall down. Instead, she directly clung to the wall. It was as if she was blessed with spider walk. She rolled and leaped between the walls. If one didn't look carefully, they would only see a black shadow. The vertical walls were like flat ground to her. In the end, even Soren and Gloria were shocked. Born with extraordinary agility, Soren looked quite dignified. As a top rogue, he was the one who could see the depths of the feline girl's strength. So the shocked expression on his face was the most obvious because he found that except for her coordination, the feline girl's body flexibility and sense of balance were almost the same as his. But Soren was already a high-grade profession that was close to legendary, and the feline girl in front of him looked so young. Gloria also looked dignified and said slowly, "The key is that she's not an adult yet. She has such a talent when she's underage. Her potential in the future in this area is difficult to estimate. It seems that the records are not wrong. This kind of war creature has amazing talent in some aspects." Clap, clap, clap. Vivian looked at the surprised expressions on Soren and Gloria's faces with satisfaction. She seemed to be quite happy. She clapped her little hands and jumped in front of Soren and said in a crisp voice, "Brother, isn't Lulu very powerful? I'm the one who found her talent in this area. In order to train her, I also roasted fish for her many times. It took a lot of effort." Soren and Gloria looked at each other. He leaned over and squatted down, stroked Vivian's little head and said softly, "She's very powerful. If she can be trained well, she may become a good helper for Vivian. When she's an adult in the future, I'll help you teach her something more powerful." The little girl nodded gently. But after a while she frowned slightly and whispered, "Brother, actually I still want to train Lulu to be a maid. You see how beautiful she is and her movements are so flexible. She's very good at catching dishes." Catching dishes? Soren was speechless. What was she going to train the feline girl in front of him? Chapter 339. A peaceful day passed by just like that. As March approached the outer islands, the storm season gradually arrived. On the second day after Soren's return, there was a heavy rain. Although there was no way to calculate the amount of rain, it was indeed very heavy. Many houses had slight leaks. This was something that couldn't be helped. The craftsmanship of this era was limited, so there was bound to be damage in the storm. Soren had already prepared for the weather in the outer islands. Otherwise, if it was a house with a thatched roof on the mainland, it might have been directly torn apart. The heavy rain fell with a pitter-patter. Even though Soren had already planned the drainage channels in advance, he could also emphasize on repairing the roads. In the end, there was still a slight rise in the water. Because the drainage channels were just dug, they were not deep enough and the drainage capacity was too low. At the same time, the roads were a little bumpy because of the storm. The paved roads were a little better, but all the roads with mud were now muddy. Basically, there was no way for carriages to pass through. Because of this storm, the slaves were unable to work. Now they were all detained, and at the same time people were sent to watch over them. The natives were a little better. Some of the slaves who were just brought over from the mainland vomited and had diarrhea because of the climate. Fortunately, there were doctors with them, so there were no casualties. After all, it was troublesome to not have a priest. The weather in the outer islands was bad, so there were more storms. At the same time, because it was an area where the storm lord believed in, the storms here were often accompanied by thunderstorms. For example, now. Lightning flashed across the sky, and from time to time, it would strike the tropical rainforest in the distance. It looked like someone was going through a tribulation. This rain lasted for a whole day. If it was a wooden house, it would probably be wet inside. However, Soren had already built a lot of brick houses. From this point of view, it was more suitable for the outer island's climate. At the same time, it was also more resistant to storms. Because of the storm, the whole camp quieted down. The pirates hid in the houses to avoid the rain. The 3 taverns were already full of people. It was dark outside and it was difficult to see more than 5 meters away. The climate here. Gloria looked up at the sky and stood beside Soren. She reached out and held his hand and said slowly, "I'm afraid it's not that suitable for farming. If this kind of weather happens often, the seeds won't be able to survive." Soren nodded and said with a serious expression, "I know. Fortunately, we haven't sowed the seeds this time, or else they would have been washed away. There were too many things that needed to be built in order to develop this place." Ditches for drainage and irrigation, as well as dams for flood control and flood control, all of which required a lot of labor. Now they could only do it step by step. It's not like we can't change this climate. I'll prepare for the sea god's sacrifice in 2 days. Gloria frowned slightly and said slowly, "Borrowing the power of the gods. The price of seeking help from a deity is not small. It's a pity that I haven't advanced to legendary yet. Otherwise, I could use the power of the Adept Tower and the Magic Circle to forcefully change the climate of the nearby area." Soren turned around and glanced at her. He reached out and pulled Gloria into his arms. "There's no need to do that. The consumption is too great. Unless there is a sorcerer tower to maintain the energy consumption. Forcefully reversing the weather is not a problem for the time being, but there will be side effects in the future. Nature is very mysterious. Unless you have the power to change the weather, it's better to just go with the flow." Gloria couldn't understand Soren's words. She could understand them separately, but when they were put together, even she felt a little strange. But she was still a witch full of wisdom, so she could roughly understand what Soren meant. She nodded gently and leaned her head on Soren's shoulder. "You can borrow the power of the gods for a short period of time, but in the long run, you will become dependent on them. This is not good for your rule here. The influence of the gods will be greater than your prestige." Soren took a deep breath and said in a deep voice, "I know. You just need to hold on for a while." Rumble. A bolt of lightning struck down, and the electric light was like a dancing dragon. Soren stood under the eaves and looked at the sky. His eyes seemed to be able to see through space and he saw more things. It was the realm of the gods and there was the power he needed. The rainstorm lasted for 3 days before it stopped. Soren's camp was flooded. Although it was a bit of a headache, it also exposed some of the shortcomings of the construction plan. After the rainstorm stopped, he quickly mobilized people to repair the damaged roads and houses. After the rainstorm, the sky was clear and boundless. It seemed that there would not be a storm for a short period of time. In terms of climate, farming here required good weather. However, when one's strength reached a certain level, they could also change the weather. The busy morning quickly passed. After the initial inseparable relationship, Soren and Gloria also returned to their usual routine. Soren was busy setting up the camp, and at the same time practicing his spellcasting proficiency. In the afternoon he practiced his combat skills. The drow and Adele were his sparring partners. Gloria usually did her research in the house and occasionally went out for a walk. Recently, the man-eating plants slightly attracted her attention, but she quickly turned her attention to the study of the shadow plane. Gloria hoped to build a portal and use the gap in the shadow plane to stabilize the connection between the two worlds. This way they could return to the material plane at any time and close the portal if they encountered any unexpected situations while exploring the wizard tower. This was the safest way. In addition, they maintained the frequency of once every 3 days, enjoying each other's time. Whether it was Soren or Gloria, they were not the kind of people who would easily indulge in lust. They had pursuits that were above the physical body, which was above the realm of the mortal world. Perhaps because of Gloria's existence, Soren's murderous aura was a lot lighter than before. This made many pirates grateful to Her Excellency the Witch. In the past, Soren was definitely an existence that killed people without blinking. His means were cruel, bloody, and ruthless. The pirates under his command always feared him more than respected him. Now Soren rarely killed people. Even if some of his men made mistakes, they would only be whipped. Being whipped was much better than being beheaded. The slaves began to get busy. The camp needed to be developed and there were still many things to do. It was really not easy to start from scratch. Sometimes even Soren felt tired. But it was all worth it because the foundation had been established here. Even the drows, after seeing the growth of this place with their own eyes, gradually felt a little more recognition. There were even drow warriors who proposed to move their tribe here. It was safer, more comfortable, and more convenient here. There was plenty of food, excellent equipment, and all kinds of daily necessities. But, because there were still some among the drows who were worried that Soren would turn from cooperation to annexation and eat up the entire drows, the female drows in the tribe were quite opposed to this. Soren was not in a hurry. He was ready to leave this to time. If they still didn't understand when the time came, then don't blame Soren for using some cruel means. A large area of wasteland had been reclaimed in the south of the camp. But it hadn't been sown yet. It would probably be around March. The burning of bricks and building of houses was still in full swing. Soren's initial plan was nearly 500 houses, enough to settle all of his men, and even a small number of slaves. The wizard Saruman had begun to study how to turn the guano stones into high-quality fertilizer. It was estimated that there would be results in about a month or so. At that time it was almost time to start sowing the fields, and the slaves from the continent had mastered the deep plowing. The farming here must be done carefully. Recently, Soren learned from his men that Saruman was very interested in the man-eating plants, which aroused his curiosity. But fortunately, Saruman didn't delay the business, so Soren didn't ask too much. In the afternoon, Soren was practicing the White Raven sword style in the training ground. Just as he finished fighting with Adele, suddenly the slaves and pirates shouted in the distance. Bang! Soren seemed to have heard something, and his figure immediately flew out and rushed in the direction of the cultivated land. One after another, vigorous figures rose from the ground. Soren's pirate leaders ran out one after another. They jumped and landed on the roof and then quickly approached the cultivated land. They had already felt a sense of belonging to a faction that was thriving and growing stronger. Close to 10 pirate leaders with strength around grade 4 quickly approached, and then they jumped over the fence and rushed to the cultivated land. Of course, the one at the front was Soren. As his figure gradually approached, he immediately saw 2 huge Quetzalcoatlus in front of him. They flapped their dragon wings and swooped down from the sky, and their huge dragon claws instantly pierced through the 2 native slaves. In the midst of the dying screams, the Quetzalcoatlus grabbed their prey like an eagle and flew away. "You're courting death." Soren's face was gloomy. When he saw the Quetzalcoatlus killing his slaves in front of him, a trace of anger and killing intent immediately emerged in his heart. Swoosh, 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 swoosh. Soren's elven war bow appeared in his hand. After the distance was within range, he shot a series of arrows. Most of them hit the Quetzalcoatlus, but most of them hit the wings of the Quetzalcoatlus. The Quetzalcoatlus let out a cry and its body shook a little, but it still flew further and further away. Trying to run? Soren expressionlessly chanted a spell, and his figure directly rose into the air. Fly. His figure flew into the sky, and at the same time, in an instant, he put another arrow on the bow and aimed at the abdomen of the Quetzalcoatlus. P.S. There's another chapter for today. After writing this chapter, I feel much more realistic. It's a feeling of inspiration coming back. Chapter 340. Fly. This was a very important spell for wizards. However, this spell also had a very big limitation. That was, fly required the caster to maintain it. It was not realistic to fly in the sky and bombard the enemy because it required abilities that were quite difficult to master. Even fighter jets needed to fly back and forth to attack continuously. If wizards wanted to cast spells while flying, they naturally had higher requirements for abilities. Those were the abilities, combat casting and flight casting. Without the support of these two abilities, the result of forcibly casting spells was likely to backfire, and then the whole person would fall from the sky. Soren did not have the ability to cast spells while flying, nor did he have the ability to cast spells while fighting. Therefore he could not cast spells in the sky at all. Once he cast a spell, the failure rate was more than 90%. However, in the flying state, it did not affect him from doing other actions such as putting an arrow on the bow. This action was not considered casting spells, and it was also within the range of fly. Therefore, when Soren's figure rose into the air, he shot 3 arrows in a row. Although it was not as smooth as when he was on the ground, he still found a sense of balance with his strong dexterity. Casting spells in the flying state was equivalent to maintaining 2 spells at the same time, but shooting in the flying state was a separate matter. Swoosh, swoosh. 3 arrows flew out, one hit the lower back of the Quetzalcoatlus, one hit the side of the Quetzalcoatlus's abdomen, and the last one hit the lower jaw directly. Half of the arrow was embedded in the lower jaw. Judgment of Death. Soren's attack seemed to have triggered the Judgment of Death. The Quetzalcoatlus wailed and shook, and then its huge body fell down shakily. The strong immunity of the dragon subspecies allowed it to avoid the Judgment of Death, but it gradually fell from the air. At the same time, a series of data prompts appeared in front of Soren's eyes. Target hit. You have dealt 16 piercing damage to the target. You have acquired some information about the ability, precise shooting. Target hit. You have dealt 27 piercing damage to the target. You have acquired some information about the ability, moving shooting. Target hit. You have dealt 54 piercing damage to the target. Hit the enemy's vital point. Judgment of Death triggered. Target has passed the Judgment of Death. You have obtained partial information about the ability, flying shooting. Soren was surprised to see so many notifications popping up in front of him. He didn't expect so many notifications to pop up at once. The most important attribute that affected long-range attacks was dexterity, and Soren's dexterity was almost legendary. Therefore he was very talented in archery. Even if he was not familiar with it in the past, the speed at which he grasped it was quite fast, not to mention that he had many other specialties to support him. That was why the leader of the Drow warriors suggested Soren to try archery, because he saw Soren's talent in this area. Soren's quasi-legendary tier stats had strengthened his mastery of the bow and arrow. At the same time, it had also greatly increased the speed at which he could master such abilities. Soren had already discovered this in the past. Temporarily buffing one's attributes would greatly increase the speed of mastering a skill. The Quetzalcoatlus was about to fall to the ground. The body of the indigenous slave that it had started to hunt had already fallen. Although it didn't fall directly, it had lost its sense of balance. If it didn't fall, it would be crippled even if it didn't die. Soren wasn't in a hurry to harvest the slaughter EXP. He directly aimed at another Quetzalcoatlus. Swoosh. This time Soren slowed down a little. He aimed at the head of the Quetzalcoatlus and shot it directly. The arrow turned into a cold light, but because of the air and wind speed, there was a slight deviation. It shot under the neck of the Quetzalcoatlus and did not hit the vital part of the head. The notification didn't appear. The first notification was the easiest to obtain. The difficulty of obtaining the next 2 notifications would gradually increase. These required time to accumulate. There was a scream. The Quetzalcoatlus let go of the corpse under its claws, then flapped its wings and accelerated, flying directly toward the distant mountains. It was scared. Even monsters would be scared, especially when their own kind fell in such a short time. Swoosh, swoosh. Soren shot continuously and shot all the arrows in one breath. Unfortunately, the power of the bow and arrow was greatly reduced after the distance was drawn. Only some of the arrows hit the dragon's wings. The damage caused was not enough to threaten the Quetzalcoatlus. The speed of fly was not as fast as the Quetzalcoatlus flying at full speed. Soren watched the enemy fly further and further away. In the end he could only land helplessly. It was much more convenient to fly in the sky with wings. The dragon was still the overlord of the sky. No one would fight with the dragon in the air. Patter. Soren landed gently on the ground. Behind him came the cheers of his subordinates and the sound of other pirate leaders approaching. He rushed directly to the Quetzalcoatlus that fell in front of him. Even if it fell from such a high altitude, it still maintained its body. After landing, it didn't directly die, but there were traces of fractures in its legs and abdomen. Not far away was the body of the indigenous slave. Its abdomen was directly pierced through by the dragon's claws, and a large part of its intestines spilled out. Soren's expression was cold. He frowned and approached. Then he slashed at the Quetzalcoatlus's head. Puchi. Blood splattered out of the wound. Soren cut off the Quetzalcoatlus's head, then frowned and looked at the mountain in the distance. Your Excellency. The half-elf first mate and the red-haired female pirate approached. When they saw Soren they bowed slightly. The half-elf first mate said, "It was these two Quetzalcoatlus that attacked the slaves. One of them had a scar on its tail. I remember it very clearly." Quetzalcoatlus. A dragon subspecies with a challenge rating of 8 to 12, a monster level between 15 to 18, and a small number of special bloodlines could reach the legendary level. Soren glanced at the Quetzalcoatlus's body in front of him and slowly said, "Let people transport the body back. These Quetzalcoatlus won't dare to attack again for the time being. We'll deal with them in 2 days. It's time to clean up the monsters nearby." The Quetzalcoatlus looked a bit like the Quetzalcoatlus of the Jurassic era. Its body was quite large, with sharp dragon claws and fangs. It was very aggressive. Its neck was very long, which was a relatively obvious weakness. As a dragon subspecies that was difficult to deal with, it was still a bit difficult for Soren's men to challenge them. Soon the others rushed over. A Quetzalcoatlus's weight was close to 2 or 3 tons. It took 20 or 30 people to carry it back. Behind them, a bearded pirate held the Quetzalcoatlus's head. When they returned to the camp, someone immediately raised the Quetzalcoatlus's head. Immediately there were cheers from the pirates below. Even the slaves cheered and looked at Soren with eyes full of awe. Strength could always suppress a lot of things. The continuous attacks of the Quetzalcoatlus also made the slaves feel fear. However, the creatures that they feared were easily killed by Soren. He was not the same as before. The Quetzalcoatlus that risked his life to challenge was now no longer Soren's opponent. When Soren returned to the camp, Gloria also happened to come out. She heard the cheers outside and came out to see. Gloria glanced at the bloody corpse of the Quetzalcoatlus in the distance and frowned slightly. "What's wrong?" Soren saw her smile and said slowly, "There's a Quetzalcoatlus's nest nearby. They just attacked the slaves. I killed one of them but the other one escaped." Gloria nodded slightly, raised her hand to lift the long hair on her earlobe and smiled playfully. "Do you need me to do it?" "No." Soren also smiled and said, "I'll take care of them tomorrow. You focus on studying the magic circle. It's best if you can stabilize a portal that can be closed and opened. The shadow plane connected here always gives me a strong sense of crisis. If we can come and go freely, we can deal with it much more easily." Gloria nodded and said softly, "Okay. I know." The Quetzalcoatlus was quickly carried away and skinned. The pirates were eager to taste the dragon meat. The drow warriors were also pointing at it. As agile warriors, they could not equip the expensive mithril and fine gold armor. The rare leather armor made of dragon skin was the best armor they could get. However, the drow warriors were not easy to speak because they had not completely surrendered to Soren. Their status was not as good as those elite pirates. In fact, only a small part of the rare weapons shipped back from the north were allocated to the drow warriors. Most of them were used to arm the core pirates under Soren's command. Rewards could not be given randomly. If he only wanted to win over the drow warriors, wouldn't it make the pirates below feel bitterly disappointed? Now these pirates were Soren's most loyal subordinates. On the other side, the leader of the drow warriors, Dark Blade, looked at everything in front of him and fell into deep thought. After a while, he called a drow ranger, whispered a few words and then said, "Send someone back the news. He's getting stronger and stronger. Warn those stubborn females not to act rashly. This person is not so easy to take advantage of. They only want to use his strength to strengthen their tribe, but they don't think that the one feeding them is a tiger." Proud female drow. These female elves, who ruled the Underdark and had a status far higher than that of males, had not fully recognized Soren's identity until now. For Dark Blade, this was a very dangerous thing. This was because he knew very well how dangerous this throat cutter was and how cruel his methods were. He was worried about what terrible things would happen when Soren's patience ran out. Chapter 341. Clang, clang. The whistling sound of the wind was accompanied by the sound of weapons clashing. Then Gloria's playful voice rang out, "That's it? So you're such a useless man. Where are your spells? How could it be interrupted so easily? Weren't you so smug last night? Why aren't you showing your male chauvinism now? Come on. Attack me with spells? You're as soft as a woman now. What happened to last night's bravery? Could it be that your legs have gone soft?" Clang, clang. Gloria was wearing a tight white dress. She was as beautiful as a blooming snow lotus, but her attacks were unusually fierce. It was as if she had been buffed with draconic strength. She swung her heavy staff and swept it at Soren's vitals. As a northern witch who was close to legendary, she was not without the slightest melee ability. On the contrary, the high-grade wizards in this world had received melee training. It could be said that even if she didn't use magic, her melee combat was equivalent to that of a second-tier warrior. Come on. Gloria's charming face blushed slightly. Perhaps it was because of the physical exhaustion, or perhaps it was because she was a little excited by what she had said. She said in a mocking tone, "Is that all you can do? Or do you only know how to play the hero on top of women at night? Are you so easily distracted and interrupted in battle?" Her full breasts bounced up and down along with her vigorous movements, creating a very attractive arc clang. Gloria executed a beautiful spinning sweep, forcing Soren to take a step back. At the same time, she leaped up and swung her staff at Soren's head. Ah! Soren took a deep breath. There was an indescribable expression on his face. In any case, he looked quite depressed. From the beginning to the end, he only defended and did not attack, so he was forced into a difficult situation by Gloria's unrestrained attacks. There were a few times when he had the time to cast a spell, but it was immediately interrupted by his opponent's ferocious attacks. After blocking and dodging 2 rounds of attacks, Soren finally found the opportunity to fire 2 arcane missiles back. They couldn't even break through Gloria's defensive energy field. The result of the battle made Soren feel a little frustrated. It was as if he was being suppressed. Clang, clang. After a new round of attacks, Gloria retreated like a butterfly. Her plump chest heaved up and down as she took a deep breath and said, "Let's stop here for today." After all, a wizard's physical strength was inferior to a melee profession. Soren put away his scimitar in frustration. He raised his head and looked at the woman in front of him, who had an inexplicably excited expression on her face. He said in a muffled voice, "I didn't expect you to be so good at taunting people." This woman had taunted him. Why didn't he realize that she had such a good taunting skill before? The words she said during the battle did affect Soren's performance. Weakness. Soren was a very strong man. Even if he had a strong will and determination, he still couldn't help but be affected when a woman taunted him about his sex life, especially when it was his own woman. Gloria gave him a mischievous look. She lifted her fair fingers and gently lifted the ends of her hair. She put on a gentle smile and said, "A wizard must learn to ignore the taunts of their enemies. This is the first lesson of mastering combat spellcasting. Many enemies can see through your emotions and use words to provoke you, thus affecting your spellcasting. Maybe you won't be affected in close combat, but from the perspective of spellcasting, you're not focused enough. Mastering combat spellcasting is not only about dealing with your enemy's attacks, but also learning to ignore their taunts. Focus was the key to combat spellcasting." Gloria, who was still valiant a moment ago, had now turned back into a gentle and charming woman. It was as if the person who had said all kinds of provocative and even shameful words to provoke Soren was not her at all. She raised her eyebrows slightly and untied her hair, letting her silky hair casually fall. She glanced at Soren and playfully said, "Are you angry?" "No." Soren replied in a muffled voice. Then he directly walked over, picked up the noble witch in front of him, and carried her on his shoulder. He then turned around and walked into the room. Scoundrel. Gloria seemed to have foreseen what was going to happen next. Her charming face was flushed, but she didn't struggle. Instead, she lightly punched Soren's shoulder and whispered, "Petty man. You said yourself that you wouldn't be angry no matter what I say during training." Bah. Soren raised his hand and slapped her round buttocks. He said in a muffled voice, I'm really not angry. I just feel like I need to prove myself again. Gloria's body softened when she heard this. Her face became redder and redder. She acted like a spoiled child and begged for mercy. I was wrong. You were as fierce as a tiger last night. Soren kicked the door open and continued in a muffled voice, It's too late. He caressed her round buttocks and pinched them a few times. Then he threw Gloria on the bed and closed the door with a magic trick. He then reached out and grabbed the witch's full breasts, kneading them slightly. He didn't even take off her clothes and directly bit her. Gloria's body trembled. She reached out and grabbed Soren's neck. Her face was as red as the sunset and she said in a soft voice, You're so petty. I clearly told you that I would find a way to provoke you during the combat training. Gentler. Annoying. Soren did not untie the clothes on Gloria's body. He lifted the corset skirt directly, then stretched out his fingers and stroked it a few times. When he took it out, it was already wet. I didn't expect you to come to my door so soon. The black-robed priest took a step forward and said with some anger in his voice, You shameless thief! How dare you steal the divine power of my lord? Today I'm going to take you back. Is that so? The handsome face of the demigod vampire showed a mocking smile. He raised his hand and snapped his fingers. A large group of vampire servants suddenly appeared around him. The black-robed priest didn't have the slightest fear on his face. He looked around contemptuously and said in a deep voice, Do you think this group of trash can help you defeat me? You're too naive. There was a short silence. Then another thin figure appeared. He stood alone at the exit of the valley. It was as if he had isolated the nearby space, bringing an evil shadow and melody to this place. The Helpheimer played with the magic flute at his fingertips, looked up and smiled, What if I join in? The black-robed priest's face changed instantly. Chapter 342. Combat Spell Casting. It was a rather difficult ability to master. This might be the most difficult ability for Soren to train so far, because even a talented wizard would need at least 3 to 5 years to master combat spell casting. The battle was ever-changing, and it was not easy to seize the opportunity to cast a spell. Many wizards would cast a defensive spell in advance, and then rely on the energy shield to fight for casting time. Even with the guidance of Gloria, Soren's progress in mastering this ability was slow. He had to admit that this woman had a very high taunting ability. While attacking and interrupting Soren's spellcasting, she could also keenly perceive Soren's emotions, and then rely on words to irritate and influence him. Damn it. Soren felt that he also needed to learn how to taunt the enemy. After all, his accumulation of basic skills was still a little shallow. The ability training could not be rushed in a short time. So after feeding Gloria, Soren began to busy himself with other things. The camp must not be left aside. In the future, whether it was Soren or Vivian, they may need the population and power here. This was to pave the way for the future of the legend. Otherwise, when the Avatar crisis broke out, he would not have the time and energy to accumulate. According to this progress, the accumulation of the population would eventually lead to a qualitative change from quantitative change. The elite pirates began to gather. Soren already had plans to clean up after the attack of the Quetzalcoatlus. The Quetzalcoatlus looked a bit like the Quetzalcoatlus of the Jurassic era. They were a little different from the familiar Quetzalcoatlus. The Quetzalcoatlus looked more like the Quetzalcoatlus in The Lord of the Rings. The Quetzalcoatlus was much easier to tame, but the Quetzalcoatlus was quite difficult. Therefore, Soren gave up the idea of taming them after a slight thought. It was difficult to find a talent who could master the art of dragon taming, and it would take a lot of time and money. Teams of elite pirates gathered, and at the same time, someone distributed the heavy javelins. However, just as Soren was ready to deal with the Quetzalcoatlus, an unexpected visitor arrived. A ship was docked at the port. It was a very special ship, and it was engraved with the emblem of the goddess of wealth. South Coast. There were neutral gods such as the goddess of wealth, evil gods such as the goddess of ocean, and even some demons from the abyss, as well as some evil gods hiding in the dark corners. Therefore, when the ship with the emblem of the goddess of wealth approached the port, Soren immediately put aside the matter of dealing with the Quetzalcoatlus and rushed towards the port with his men. He didn't know how the believers of the Mistress of Riches found this place. However, as the most powerful church in the South Coast, Soren could not afford to offend the Lady of Wealth, who had mid-level divine power. Wealth Church. A powerful force that remained neutral and had forces all over the world. When Soren arrived at the port, there were already many people gathered there. Pirates had always been lawless and greedy for wealth. However, when they saw these people who were covered in jewels and treasures, they became quite obedient. Some of them even bowed slightly in respect. The goddess of wealth was a widely believed god. She had a large number of followers, but because it was difficult for the wealth priesthood to produce fanatics, her divine power was still much weaker than some of the stronger gods. Sometimes, quantity might not be able to suppress quality. Your Excellency throat cutter. The person who came down from the deck was a woman wearing a silver robe with golden cuffs. She had beautiful golden hair, and 6 gemstone rings on her 10 fingers. It was said that the goddess of wealth loved gold. Many of her priests had golden hair, and these priests were covered in jewels and treasures. They liked to wear expensive jewelry, and their clothes were also exquisite and luxurious. This was a tall and voluptuous woman. She wore a string of expensive pearl necklace on her chest. She bowed slightly toward Soren and smiled and slowly said, "Your Excellency, I have brought you the goodwill of the Mistress of Wealth." The goodwill of the Mistress of Wealth? Soren didn't relax because of this. He looked at the tall woman in front of him and slowly said, "Welcome to this deserted island. I'm very curious how you found this place." The tall woman didn't answer directly. Instead, she smiled and said, "The Mistress of Wealth has been watching us." It seemed like someone had leaked the information. Soren wasn't angry because it was difficult to hide such a big target from a powerful god's church. He was just curious how the other party knew the route here. The tall woman in front of him glanced around and looked at the port in front of her. She smiled and said, "Your Excellency has a good eye. Just the port here is enough to bring a lot of wealth in the future." Speaking of this, her expression was a little playful. "Aren't you going to invite me in to have a look?" She didn't come with good intentions. Although the other party had been smiling, Soren felt that this might not be a good thing. Because behind him stood the Sea Church. If he was accidentally involved in the confrontation between two gods' churches, it would definitely be a terrible disaster. "Please?" Soren turned around and made an inviting gesture. Even if he was one of the 3 pirate kings on the south coast, there was not much difference in status when facing a high-grade priest from the Church of Wealth. The necessary respect was still certain. Not many people would want to offend the Mistress of Wealth. Who would say no to money? The priest of the Goddess of Wealth showed a satisfied smile on her face. She got up and followed Soren while observing the surrounding environment. Behind her, there were 2 low-grade priests and temple warriors who were fully equipped with fine armor. The Mistress of Wealth was the richest god, so most of the temple warriors who believed in her were equipped with first-class equipment. Just the 8 temple guards behind her were enough to kill a group of elite pirates under Soren's command. Because Soren just glanced at them and saw that their weapons were mixed with adamantine. The Principality of Rossard. In the middle of an incomparably grand hall sat a woman who looked rather dangerous. She looked at the messenger below with cold eyes, and a playful smile appeared on her coquettish face. Her red lips opened slightly and said, "What do you mean? Astrid wants to form an alliance with me? Ah. Is he worthy? A puppet supported by the Naga Siren royal family. Naive enough to want to form an alliance with me. I'm afraid he can't even deal with the newly risen throat cutter. Now get out of here. Go back and tell him. He wants to form an alliance with me. Let the Naga Siren royal family behind him send a messenger here." Humiliation. The humiliation from the Duke of Red Dragon's wife made the messenger a little angry, but he didn't dare to do anything because the woman in front of him was quite terrifying and cruel. It was said that in order to gain power, she slaughtered her own family. Her purpose was to use some kind of evil spell to extract the power of other people in the family who had the blood of warlocks. This allowed her to advance to the legendary realm in just a few years and become the most powerful Red Dragon warlock in the South Coast. And so far, no one had seen her fight with all her strength. Many people thought that she had the strength of a high-grade legendary. A high-grade legendary dragon warlock. Not only was he a powerful spellcaster, but he was also a fearsome warrior. The Duke of Red Dragon's wife. Her rise was more exaggerated than the rumored throat cutter. When this cruel woman first appeared, she appeared as the newlywed wife of the Duke of Rossard. However, shortly after she married the old Duke of Rossard, the old Duke had already died, and his 3 sons also died frequently in accidents. Finally, she took over the power as expected, and at the same time she controlled a duchy at an amazing speed in just a few years. It could be said that she was one of the most feared women on the south coast. Her ruthlessness and cruelty were comparable to the drows in the Underdark. Almost anyone who dealt with her was very cautious because if they were not careful, they might be doomed eternally. The messenger slowly withdrew from the hall. Before leaving, he took a deep look at the woman on the throne, then turned and left. You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Adventures YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.